it's a difficult audit, but it's a legislative requirement. The Auditor General is required to do so. So, I don't have a comment other than to say I think it's going to get a lot more tougher.
No, you certainly are.
And, that doesn't give me much comfort, to be honest. Do you have a feel, though, for the amount of time that is spent on the financial part of the audit as against the non-financial part of the audit? Is it 50-50 or is it 75-25? What is the breakdown?
Through Chair, I would say, on most of my clients, I look at about 65 to 35% split between hours, between financial and non-financial. That's how we start the planning. We start. What inevitably happens is that we end up probably going towards closer to 50-50 when it's non-financial performance. And I'll tell you why that happens. It's because entities prepare for the financial statements. You've got trial balance, you've got supporting information, etc. The performance reporting is usually left to the end. The systems and processes, and it's a conversation we had the last time, are not ready for the reporting. They're not robust enough. So, you might start out by thinking, okay, I'm going to approach this by relying on controls. And when you do a systems description, you find out it's not there. So you start to flip and push more resource into the non-financial performance space where you're actually ending up at a 50-50 time spent. But ideally it should be 65, because we select less samples, it's less material, a bigger, higher materiality, etc. on your performance reporting. But it slowly shifts because entities are just not geared up for it. That's the reality we face when we go into clients.
Look, sorry, the poor cheering so far. We've flipped into part B, and I think you wanted to dispense with part A, which was about the management letter. That's all right. It's poor cheering, but obviously you can see that elected members and independent members are very keen to talk about fee and timeline and audit scope. So perhaps if you could now talk to your engagement letter and the audit plan, and then I suspect there'll be a further round of questions if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. No, that's fine. It's good. I'm warmed up. So I'll just take you through a couple of things, members of the committee. First, the audit engagement letter is our standard terms and conditions. I won't take you through all of that. I'm sure your legal team will go over that if there's anything, and we're happy to consider any changes. The second one, and it's the more important one, is the audit plan for 30 June 2023. And it's to pick up. So the audit plan, we've had a round of meetings with members of the executive team and early on the year with Mayor Bernie and yourself, Chair. And from that, we've picked up some what we call client-specific, but also across the sector issues, audit risks and issues. And for the 30 June 2023 audit, I don't think any of these will be a surprise for you. So the key risks for us was around revaluations of property, plant and equipment. The movements we've seen across the board last year and likely to see this is quite significant, just given the economy and the way it is at the moment. And again, that was also, the three water space. It's about getting the right numbers. If assets are going to transfer, there needs to be that reliability. In this instance, third parties will place reliance on your valuations. So we need to make sure that we continue to get it right. The second one is just around complaints and response times performance measures. So we've had that as a qualification. So we carry that forward again, and that's just the number of complaints coming in and how they're recorded. It's around the completeness of the complaints. Are we capturing all the complaints? The third item is around service performance reporting. So that's the new accounting, or I should say, it's under the accounting standards rather than the auditing standards. And that is, does council or entities tell a complete performance story. So what the money they're using, is it achieving the outcomes that has been set at the beginning, and in your case in the LTP, do those performance measures that you report on annually, do they reflect the true performance of councils? Now, as I mentioned last time, we're locked into these measures for the next 3 years, can't change them, but it still means that we have to opine on the appropriateness of the framework. And that's quite a challenge. It's a judgment to a large extent. And there's a process underway in the office to make sure that we're consistent around the appropriateness. The second part is around disclosures, so there'll be added disclosures in your annual report around any judgments and assumptions made in reporting on that information. So there's a bit more disclosures around that. The third aspect is the impact of Three Waters. So again, we're not sure what will happen between now and the time we sign in October. But if there's anything, how does that impact on your accounts? So if there's something, and I'm not by any means implying I know what's in the legislation, but if the legislation says that all debt will be transferred, we'd expect them to see how you disclose it. Does it move out of current into out of term debt into current debt, so disclosures, etc. around that. We're hoping it's nothing as drastic as that, and we just continue with the current disclosures that we have and work our way through it. So we have to consider that. And then the last one is just the risk of override of management controls, which is standard across all audits. Then what we've determined is our materiality based on last year's numbers. So we set a materiality for revaluations of $67 million. So that's only to take into account any movement in revaluations. It does not impact on other balances. We set what we call a lower or a specific materiality for all other balances of 1.75 million. Now, the 67 million I think is quite key for this committee in terms of we're not performing valuations that and officials prepare what we call an assessment, a fair value movement assessment, that you use that as your benchmark. So if that movement is under $67 million, we're not going to pay too much attention to it in a category, in a class of assets, right? Because we're saying it's within our materiality, it's not going to impact on the accounts. Of course, we wouldn't want you to set your benchmark at that. You'd probably want to drop it a bit lower, I would say, probably in the range of something between 70 and 80% of that number, so that you can do your own determination around fair value movements. And again, as I said the last time, we said documents and judgments like that would be good to come to this committee to consider and say that's reasonable. Have you considered this, and just interrogate any fair value assessments where judgments are being applied. And then we have a clearly trivial threshold. So that's anything over $87,500 we put onto our error schedule, and would expect the management would adjust for that all. And if not adjusted, we'll report those to councils. We then also set individual materiality for the different performance measures, and we've outlined in the audit plan which measures we will be auditing, so you know that up front. And the idea here is, there's always a risk that entities look at that and they make sure they got everything sorted for that. Nothing stops us from coming in and saying, well, we'll select one new measure during the audit, so just to make sure that systems are consistently in place. I'm not saying we're going to do it, but there's always an element of surprise in an audit that we would do if we have some concerns around systems and processes. So it's us just exercising at the right level of skepticism. In terms of the audit itself, we we're looking to come in on the 19th of June for a 2-week interim, and then a final audit on the 25th of September, with sign-in on the 25th of October, and a draft report to council, so on the 31st of October on our audit findings, but obviously would look to come to the council adoption meeting with any issues. If anything does arise that is significant, we will engage with you throughout the audit process on that, so not leave it to the end. Chet, do you want me to go on to the fees now, or will that distract from the conversation?
Yeah, look, I think if we could just park that for a moment, because I've got a few questions that I'd like to ask before opening it up to the table, and then hopefully we can land at a conversation around time frame and fees. And you'll see that some of the questions I have for you sort of relate a little bit to fees as well. So if I could start with just getting you to explain to me, and it is, I acknowledge it's covered partly in your letter, but in terms of that materiality and how you actually calculate that or determine that, I understand there's some, I think you call them IFRS practice statements that guides that, but could you just dumb it down for me in terms of how you set those thresholds, particularly around that $67 million revaluation number?
Yeah. So Chair, what we do is we have the 67 is what we call is our plan in materiality, and the base that we use for that is your assets on your balance sheet, either at the end of the previous financial year or if you have a budget, and we're comfortable that your budget processes are robust enough, we'll use the budgeted number. In this case, we had access to the 22 accounts, which was audited. We're satisfied with it, so we've gone with that. Rather than what the amount would normally have been in annual plan or your LTP. And that's not saying because we don't place any reliance on that. It's just that the movements, etc., has been quite a bit over the last 2 years, so that's the best number, if you like. So that's the base. We then have a range of between 0 and 10%, which in terms of our audit methodology, which is applied across all our clients for what we call capital intensive entities. So all councils are capital intensive entities by their nature. You carry a massive balance sheet with assets on it, and we have to choose a range between 0 and 10% is the range. We have to then, based on my experience and understanding of the council, select a percentage, and that's how we get to the 67. I can't tell you off the top of my head if that was 8 or 7.5% of your asset base, but it's somewhere it's on the top end of that range. I would tell you that.
Yeah, look, that's really helpful. Thank you. So it flows into the next question, which is around. Obviously, we did some revaluations last year, and so if we were to use that fair value assessment process this year,
yeah,
what that means in terms of an audit scope and also ultimately fee if that's under that materiality threshold, because if you could talk to that.
Yeah, a very good question, Chair. So council, entities can value anything between 1 year to 5 years. That's the valuation cycle. They don't have to do it every year. But when you're not doing a valuation on any class of assets, that's when that fair value assessment kicks in. And to do that fair value assessment, you can do it internally based on contract prices, what you understand the market to be, having some good robust data that we can go and verify. So if you say, and I'll just use an example, land and buildings, you're going to value land, just the land asset class. You do an internal assessment and say land in Levin is only moved by 3%, and guess what? Here's all the data, independent source data that supports our view. 3% is not going to take us over the auditor's materiality. We've got enough evidence to support it. That's the paper. We'll come and review it, look at your documentation, compare it to our data, because we do our own little data sets as well, and say, well, it's within the range, it's reasonable, no valuation required. If, on the other hand, you you're over the threshold, our materiality, that triggers a full valuation. And that's a lot more work because then it's given off to a valuer, independent valuer. We'd have to test the assumptions that valuer does, rerun the calculations and select a sample of assets. So if the valuer says, we've got pricing for constructing, for construction costs is $1,000 a square meter, we'd say, well, where did you get that from? Is it reasonable? So we do also quite a bit more work than we would do with a fair value assessment. So the work does change, but those fair value assessments is not just saying Stats New Zealand says inflation is 8% and it needs to be unique to those assets. So your infrastructure assets a little bit more complex, and that's where data sharing in the district and region becomes really important, because you might again not replace a pipe this year, but the colleagues in Palmerston North might have done it, or down in Kaputico. So can you use that as a proxy to support your decision? So that's what the fair value assessment does, and it can be done. Our advice is that and most councils have this 0 to 3 years. They'll do a full valuation, but in the interim, how far behind have they fallen?
So so the second part to that question was, I guess, is if we land there in terms of fair value assessment, what does that mean? Presumably that means that there's a significant saving of sort of time, effort, resource in terms of the audit, and so it would follow then that there would be potentially, well, hopefully, a decent chunk in terms of saving of the audit fee. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely, Chan. Exactly, that would be the case, because the amount of work we do on a fair value assessment is not going to be the same. So we will have that saving. Yep. But it's how robust those fair value assessments are that boils down to, because what we've seen is, just preparing a one page and saying Stats says this and apply that and say we're good is not going to cut the mustard.
Jacinta, did you have some commentary on that?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment that we are planning to do so that Peishan and the team are doing a fair value assessment at the moment, because we've done consecutive revaluations the last few years. It's expensive. It's upwards of $100,000 we've spent on an annual basis doing those revaluations, and once you get land and buildings, infrastructure, roads as well. So we'll absolutely try to do that if we can, and we're in the process of doing that. There is that tricky point in terms of good practice, in terms of sharing across the sector, indices that are reasonable enough to pass the test without going too far, and getting that central guidance in terms of what good indices that the sector can use collectively. I know there'll be market conditions that vary across different parts of the district or across different parts of the country, but having that central recommended resource in terms of where we should go to get that market indication would be really useful from a local government perspective.
Clint, did you have any comment or response to that?
No, Chair, I think the only risk with the fair value assessments doing it so late in the year, if it does point to triggering a full valuation, it's then getting the resource to do it. That's the risk you run, and my advice to clients is you do that round about March, so it gives you enough runway to if it does trigger a revaluation, you come away and say, well, then you can go to the market, find a valuer to do it. But I think Jacinta's point is right. We've been valuing year on year, so you would think you're pretty close, within our range. I'd like to believe.
Thank you, Clint. And so just my final question before I open it up for further questions is just in relation to, I guess I'll call them service complaints. So this is where there's an event, someone rings in with a complaint, and previously our service provider was treating that as one complaint, and if there were multiple, despite there being, or even if there was multiple calls about that same issue. And so one of the things that's obviously inside the audit plan is to look at that in terms of the changes or improvements we've made in that space. And again, I'm just keen to understand, is that a quite a wide exercise, or can that be narrowed up and really sort of targeted and based really on a sort of a quite well-defined sample, as opposed to sort of something that potentially is broader than it potentially needs to be? Because obviously we've got a third-party supplier. This is an issue that's been across multiple councils, and so it seems that there's a high level of confidence that the issues have been resolved, or the issue's been resolved. And so just again sort of questioning around the level of effort and time and money that we're spending on sort of validating and verifying something that we already have a reasonable level of confidence around.
So through you, Chair, again, I suppose our whole approach and the amount of testing we do is driven by what we see when we do the systems work, right? So in the instance of the complaints, we would have determined upfront already that we can't get comfort over completeness, and we'd stop our work there. We're not going to go and test any further if we know we're not going to, well, and no matter how much we test, we could have only listened to phone calls, I suppose, but I'm not sure if that adds any value. I think this year where we are, we're in the space where the service provider has fixed up the systems and things should be working. What we do in that instance is we ask the auditor for that entity to provide us with assurance around the systems and controls there. So whatever number then comes back in, we rely on, we just put that report on file as we would do for an investment fund or anything. So we do centralize it rather than us each team having to do that work. Does that answer your question?
No, that's great, thank you. Now, look, opening it up to the table, sorry I dominated that first little bit there, but did anyone else have any further questions or comments, including around time frame and fees? So opening that up. Virginia.
I was waiting for the opportunity to talk about fees again. Yes, first up, I suppose, well done on all the papers. There's good transparency here. The audit plan and the engagement letter are sort of as expected. So I think it looks good. I think there's two key assumptions in the fee, but that still need a bit more work before those fees get finalised. In terms of that fair value assessment conversation, my experience has been. Used to be sort of every 3 years you'd end up doing a full revaluation, and in the interim years you'd do just desktop exercises off the back of the fair value assessment. And in the last few years it's come down to every second year because of sort of economic conditions and so on. So I think one of those key assumptions that you led with around there's a full revaluation every year, I think that really needs a bit more work and refinement, and it's probably in the current context it may be every second year, and so the fees should be adjusted for that. So there's that key piece. I think the other bit that probably needs a bit more work is, going back to the audit management report, where we've seen some really good progress around closing out a whole lot of, the 25 audit items. So there's been, a big tidy up, lot of things sorted out. Obviously, much improved capability in the team, and I think overall the control environment must be improved, and I think that needs to reflect back in the audit plans and in the fee setting as well, that you shouldn't be having to spend the gazillion number of hours doing your audit as has happened over the last few years. So I think there's a bit more work to do around some of those key assumptions because they just don't feel right at the moment, and hopefully that'll help the planning process. And also just congratulations on the whole time planning process for this next annual report. It all looks good, and it's good to see the stepped improvement around the delivery plans and so on there as well.
Did you want to respond to that, Clint?
Yes, Chair. I just wondered if it was now the right time to talk about the fee and the hours.
Look, I invite you to do that, because I think we're saying we love you, Clint, but we really want you to sharpen the pencil. I think you've already heard that message.
My sharpener's blunt, Chair. No, look here, I think this is a serious conversation, and I did say to Jacinta when I put up the paper, I hope you're sitting down, because this was my first cut of it. In all honesty, it is by no means the final fee. And as I I've scribbled here because I've had already pushed back in the office, and that's even before it's gone to the Office of the Auditor General, right, for moderation. So, my if I step back from it and say, for a council this size, the revenue base, the asset base, what would be the right number of hours? I think this is a 1,400 to 1,500 hour audit. That would be my sense of it. If I think about a 7-week audit all up with an interim, a pre-final, and a final, a staff of a team of 4, some manager, director time on top of that, that's kind of I think the hours should be roughly in that region of 1,400. This was the worst case scenario that I put up because 1,800. I agree with the members of the committee. Doing the audit for 1,700 hours is far too high. There's an element of inefficiencies on our part. There's also an element of inefficiencies on council's part in terms of delivery over the past, and that's reflected in there, in that 1,800 hours that I put up originally. So, I know for sure it's not going to pass through our own Audit New Zealand's own moderation process, and that conversations are continuing. And Monday we have another discussion with our executive leadership team on that, Chair. So I think, if I could say to the committee, I would be very disappointed if we end up with 1,300 hours, because all it means that I'll be coming back to ask for additional fees at the end, and that's a lot more admin and a lot more difficult. I think it's a 1,400 to 1,500 hour audit, and to get it done in the tight time frames with the right staff mix, etc. That I'm committed to, and we've resourced for it. I touch wood, those people are still around in September, October, but we still have those challenges. So, with that in mind, we're going to see an increase in fees, and the Auditor General, Mayor Bernie, I don't know if you've received the letter or Monique, has written to all councils just explaining the fee setting process. But yeah, I just want to say that was the worst case, and I didn't want to come here low and then come back and have another conversation, but I think that will be trimmed back is my expectation.
So can I just ask, when are we likely to see the post-moderation number?
So the numbers go up, I think, mid next week to the Auditor General's office, and then they wait, also collating from other service providers. So I'm hoping by the end of June they're working on. They've split it between city councils, regional councils have just gone up, and they're now doing district councils. So the timing, it's obviously a contentious issue across the sector, so it's not going to be resolved very quick. It's my sense.
Look, thanks for the frankness of the discussion. Did anyone else have any further comments or questions around fees? Because then I'm quite keen to move on to talk about timeframes, if that's all right. Oh, I've got a hand up from Monique, so I'll pass over to CEO Monique.
Kia ora. Thanks, Councillor Jennings. I just thought it was probably important to note, particularly for any members of the public watching, that the remit put forward from Wanganui District Council, which this council has supported, which is around essentially formally raising the sector's concerns around audit fees and pricing structure, that has been accepted as a remit that will be debated at the LGNZ AGM in July.
Thanks, Monique. Mayor Bernie.
Thank you, Chair. Clint, you talk about worst possible scenario. What is the best possible scenario?
I shouldn't have said that. Through your Chair, it's that 1,400 to 1,500 hours, and I think we're looking at a fee of about 270 270k fee would be kind of the ballpark that I would be looking for.
Yeah, it's interesting. We sat around our table last week and did deliberations, and we were trying to find savings so that we could reduce our rates. We were even looking at the number of times that we mowed our fields and whether we actually continued to be part of grants and things like this. So to load, $140,000 onto us pretty much or more for an audit fee that our ratepayers would like some. I know they need that reassurance that we are looking after their rates, but that sort of increase, I don't think is. I don't think it's great. To be honest, I can understand there are pressures on all sorts of business, and we're facing that exactly with insurance and interest and all those sorts of things. But to see that volume in one go is really hard for us as a community to understand when we're sitting here only having signed off our 2022 report, a couple of months ago type of thing. So it has even less meaning because it's so late. So I just make a comment. It's not for you to answer, but I think the message needs to go back to the Auditor General that this shouldn't happen. And I don't think it's fair on our community to be able to actually sustain that sort of increase all at once.
Would you like to respond to that?
It doesn't. I'll take that as a comment, and I certainly will take it back.
Look, I think it's important that we talk about timeline now. And Jacinta, did you wanted to just make some couple of comments on timeframe first?
If that's okay, yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. One thing in particular that we were, of course, wanting to make sure happened was that getting the audit signed off by the end of October. And so for this council, that looks like a Wednesday, the 25th. Clint and I and the team have had a number of conversations about how we can make this work. Typically, though, in terms of the timing, and Clint can comment on this, is around the timing of central government audits and when realistically audit teams can start. Because in central government they're not required to go through the council process. For us, that creates quite an extensive, adds on extra time as would be expected. So part of the conversation would be good to have today as part of this committee is we were thinking of different ways that we can try and make this work to get everything across the line by the end of October. One suggestion is around potentially, rather than having risk and assurance first and then having the papers 2 more weeks, them going to council, is that potentially joining the two committees together for that day to discuss the annual report so that there was that extended time to give us a better opportunity to get through the audit on time. It's not an issue in terms of the time we need to do the audit. It's more of a question about when the audit team can be on site to then allow us the right amount of time to get through the paper and through council and through risk and assurance and in enough time to be statutorily compliant by the end of October.
And just to comment that recommendation 2.3 on the council paper reflects that proposal sort of as a hybrid, bringing the two meetings together. Did any member have a comment or question around time frame yeah. Member Jenny.
I suppose my experience has been it is better, even if it's just a couple of weeks before, that you have an opportunity and to review the annual report, the Audit and Risk Committee and Council. It could be a joint meeting then, and that's really the opportunity to kind of really get some feedback and fine-tune any final bits and bobs. You don't really want that happening on the day that the annual report's being adopted on the 25th. So I'd suggest, even if it's the papers are distributed just a couple of days before the meeting, so we've got shorter time frames to read those agenda papers, and that enables you more time with auditors and to get the content as clean as possible. But rather having a meeting a little bit early, maybe a couple of weeks or something before that final sign-out date, and that's a real opportunity for feedback. And then on the 25th is more a final adoption, and you've incorporated all those changes, and that would be my suggestion.
and that's absolutely what we're trying for, but it can't be done with resourcing. If we want to do it by the end of October, which is the message. Is that still the same, Clint?
Yeah, Clint.
Can I just clarify? I suppose that meeting that would happen a little bit earlier would not be an audited set of financial statements. It would be, not completely audited. Most of the work's done. The council and committee would be aware that there's still some further work to do, but basically we'd be trying to clear out sort of that 80-20 rule, that we can see that most of the stuff's there and there's a little bit of risk, but largely we can get comfort as to where you've got to, and I suppose also place reliance on the controls and the processes that you've had in the QA processes ahead of that, and what the plans are for the 25th. So, yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. I mean, if that's the committee's open to that, that's absolutely something that we could do. Mm-hmm.
So, sorry, we're just trying to find what is the current scheduled date for the risk and assurance in October, and if there isn't one, could we look to having an extraordinary meeting? Okay, so there isn't one. So, picking up on the suggestion of Member Jenny, is there an opportunity to have an extraordinary meeting, build that somewhere in the timeline that enables the kind of process that Jenny's outlined, acknowledging then that there's the joint or a decision point on the 25th.
That's absolutely fine, as long as there's the understanding that it won't be followed through its process, and it won't have received any clearance from audit. That's generally how we like to approach it, so that it is through all the right channels first. But absolutely hear what you're saying, and I'm happy to do that if that's the will of the table.
There is a risk and assurance meeting set for the 8th of November.
So if it was on the 11th, probably that would be the 11th of October may be an option in terms of a consideration, but we'll work on that and come back.
Our members comfortable if that's, I guess, we won't. I don't think we need a resolution around it. I think we can just request that officers go away and look at an extraordinary meeting on the 11th of October. There seems to be nodding of the head, so I think that's perfect. Oh, Clint.
So, Chair, I just wanted to input into the discussion because I think it's a couple of things. So we scheduled to start our audit on the 25th of September. What good practice would look like is that prior to that this committee has a copy of the annual report before it comes to audit. So you give your inputs on it, and it doesn't have to be in a meeting. It might just be comments back, and then the version that we get already incorporates the first cut of management comments. And again, I suppose it's a capacity at council to do that. Then we get in a copy that's been internally QA'd, has the oversight of the committee. So on the 25th of September, we start with a full set of annual report. I think the 10th of October meeting is probably a meeting we could still have. We come and just give an update on the audit, how we're tracking, just to give comfort to the committee. It's not a clearance meeting, but just to give comfort to the committee that things are on track or off track, or the 11th or whatever that date was, and then the adoption meeting on the 25th. Chief, if that that kind of timetable can follow, because I think one of the things I suppose the challenge for me is that if we get a set of accounts on the 25th, or annual report, I want to say on the 25th of September, the committee meets after that, puts through changes, we're working off another version, and then that's where all the added work comes in. And what I've said to Jacinta, my preference is we get a version on the 25th, we just do our work, and we've got some dates where we come back and say, these are all our changes, put it through, give us the next version, which is the one that we will then look to sign off on. It just makes it a lot cleaner, because if we get multiple versions, I think of the last one we were on to version 8 or something, it just gets really messy and trickier to audit.
I'd just like to take some advice from the CEO Monique, and then perhaps you might have a view also, Jacinta, before we can sort of finalise what we might look like in terms of a time frame and a process. Monique?
Kia ora. I apologies if I was there in person. Jacinta and I might have had a quick chat about this right now, but what I would say is that I think that just reminding the committee that as officers we can meet with you any time between now and the 25th of September when audit are going to be ready to receive our accounts, and obviously our accounts might not be final, but we will be able to be presenting to you, and Jacinta can probably confirm the time frame, the high level results, what it's telling us, where there might be some key decisions needing to be made around capital funding, reserve funding. The bit that I raised the hand for and that I just want to emphasise, and Clint, this will be no surprise to you because I've continued to reiterate it, but our deadline is not October the 25th. Our deadline is the 19th of October, when we need to release a public agenda in order to meet our obligations under the Official Information and Meetings Act. And so sure, we might not have the fully completed audit documentation, but it's really important that we take into consideration the local government requirements here, not just, it's not as simple as just turning up to a meeting in that final week of October. We need an extra week.
Your chair absolutely understand that, because the documents have to go out, and that's why I'm saying, the earlier the committee gets to give inputs on, we will review with the view of giving feedback on the accounts for any substantive changes before the 19th, so that the report can still go out, but we won't be including our audit report in it until all the work's finished, which will be probably a week later.
Jacinta, did you?
Yeah. Thanks. And I think my next comment, happy to have those meetings. I guess what I'd say is we're in the middle of steering a significant amount of change in the team. And so where the flexibility to respond to an extra week's earlier to deliver an annual report to a different set of, rather than allowing that time to work through it methodically ourselves and adding an extra review time up front is probably going to be a push, because we're really trying to do an excellent job up front and change the way that we work. So absolutely happy to have conversations, but I can't guarantee that there's an extra week that can be created in the process up front before we give it to you, Clint, at this stage. But absolutely, I'm not saying we can't share with you. I'm just saying the quality in terms of what we would like to share with you, I can't guarantee it'll be ready a week or 10 days earlier.
What I propose to do is, I think we abandon the recommendation 2.3 that's on the council paper, and we, unless you have some contrary advice, but I think that if the committee is comfortable, what I'll do is I can work with Monique and Jacinta to work out what a process and what this might look like, and then we can communicate that by email, and then if necessary, we can formalise that by way of a resolution at our next meeting, if members are comfortable with that. Okay. Well, I think unless there's any further comments, questions, anything further you'd like to say, Clint or Peishan, I think we can bring this agenda item to a close. Excellent. Thank you very much, Clint. Much appreciated as always. Alright, next up we have agenda item 6.2, which is the Treasury Report for the March 2023 quarter.
Sorry, Chair.
Oh,
There are a couple of questions I have of management, and I know this is a second look, but one of the reasons is based on a briefing I heard this morning. So I just want to ask a couple things, and I mean, it's what I ask is okay in public. I'm not saying anything out of
absolutely go for it.
Okay, so on page 61, it's under the internal controls 4.2, and it speaks of, that whole logging of any changes to privileged network accounts. And this morning, our briefing or update around procurement shared with us the development of a procurement portal internal, and then it will lead to a supplier portal externally. And I guess I just want to signal early some, because there'll obviously be commercial sensitivities in some of that. And I had asked the question about, well, who's accessing that? Like, is it certain tiers within the staff structure, or is it all access? And I'm just wanting some assurances that these newer systems or way of operating that we bring online are going to, I guess, address the concerns raised in this audit. So that's the first thing I just...
So do you want to respond to that now, or do you want to take that on notice and come back?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, absolutely. In terms of any new systems, and particularly in the procurement one where there's sensitivity around supplier information, or which staff have access to what levels of information, any part of any change in system, absolutely, we would consider who's got access and have we got access set at the right levels. For example, we've implemented budgeting and forecasting software that's being used for our planning processes. As part of that has the ability for staff to have access to labour information for the staff that report to them. So for that particular element of the module, it's very specific in terms of who can see what and why. So I think as part of any software, we absolutely have to make sure we're considering that. We haven't yet got anywhere near that in terms of that procurement software yet, though.
Cool. Yeah, so is it early sort of a signal around that? And then the second one on the same page, 4.3, that business continuity, and this kind of is coming from conversations, I guess, around our ability to respond versus react to, let's say, disaster. And obviously we do fire drills and things like that, we can rehearse, but how, I guess in the management comment, it talks about, we've appointed a new risk manager, cool, captures, and we'll manage that. But I guess furthermore, or what I'm seeking is a level of these business continuity plans to be able to be activated or practiced at any time, like even if it's once a year or 6 months. Earthquake, what's the scenario like? The live-in water supply is destroyed. What are we going to do?
Jacinta, do you want to comment, and then I'm happy to sort of link back. There's certainly there's a proposal in the internal audit program around BCP, and so it'd be good to get a sense of whether you think that covers, I guess, your area of interest or focus. But I'll let you respond, and then we can have that conversation.
Thanks, and through you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. Your question's a very good one. And as part of the internal audit paper, which we'll talk about, one thing we're keen to get this committee's view on is around the business continuity plan. For example, sometimes in the internal audit area, we'll ask people to review what we're doing, but we've recognised that we do need to do some more work in this space. And part of that absolutely will involve having conversations about trials and making sure we get the schedule of those up and running, and make sure from a business continuity perspective that we're doing a really good job in that space. So that's a part of the conversation, is rather than have somebody come in and do an internal audit, we already know we want to do some work, so we'd like to invest some of that funding in making sure that we're upping our game in that space.
And look, I think as part of the risk discussion that's coming up as well, I think there's some touch points in there around that BCP critical service and critical asset risk management, and that inevitably involves a discussion around how are we testing our preparedness for things. So really keen if you're happy to park that conversation for.
Cool.
for-
And
for
so I
following
look
those.
forward to that schedule, whatever that's going to look like. And I guess it's just in light of those sorts of events happening more frequently. And I think we responded really well when it came to the tornado, and our resilience was quite up there. But imagine if that happened at a different time of the day, not when everyone was at home in bed or sort of only a few people were out on the street. If that happened in the middle of, peak times and that kind of same event, what?
I know. Let's go. Thank you, Councillor Tukupa. I think we'll park that for a conversation as part of the risk or the internal audit program, because it's certainly a point, an aspect that I share your thinking around. So what we'll do is say, we'll focus now on item 6.2, which was the Treasury report. Peishan has been waiting patiently. Thank you very much. If I could just move 2.1 and 2.2, that the report be received and that this matter or decision be recognised as not significant. Thank you, Councillor Young. All in favour? Thank you. Peishan, would you like to introduce the report?
Yes, so this is the Treasury report for quarter ending 31st of March 2023. Two issues that I would like to bring to your attention is there is a slight policy breach at the time, and we have made the decision that we were waiting until April to enter into an interest rate swap agreement to correct the breach because of pricing. So if we would have gone ahead in March to enter into the interest rate swap, it might have been resulted in a higher price. So we've made a conscious decision to wait until April, and that's written in the report, just so that you're aware. The other issue that I would like to flag to you is the rising interest rate. So the assumption that we made in the current financial year was a 3% interest rate. And as you can see, as at 31st of March 2023, the cost of funds is sitting at 3.78%. And that is a risk that we are well aware of. That was reported to the council as well, I think. So opening the floor for questions.
Thank you, Peishan. And look, so member Jenny sent in a question about the benchmark breach. So I'll let her ask that further if there's any further aspects to that. But just before I do that, I just thought I'd invite you to also just update us with respect to the Standard & Poor's visit on, I think it was the 1st of June, and what's happening with our rating.
Yes, thank you for the reminder, Chair. On the 1st of June, we had a meeting with Standard & Poor's where they've advised us that we have maintained our credit rating at AA- and with a stable outlook. So that's a very good news given the current condition of economy we're in. Any questions?
Yeah, did you want to headline or provide any headlines or highlights in terms of, areas of focus or those downgrade scenarios? That would be useful, I think.
Cool. So most of the other areas are what we are aware of already, so which is a market trend, economic downturn and all that. However, we've done well in our liquidity management. The only downside that Standard & Poor's have flagged is our budgetary performance, which is mainly to do with our capital program and whether we will achieve what we said in the long-term plan amendment. So that's the only major downside.
Thank you for that. Member Jenny, did you want to explore the aspect you'd raised by email in terms of the benchmark breach, or you?
I'm comfortable with the response I got. Thank you.
Is there any further comments, questions on the Treasury report?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, one item in terms of full disclosure is when we set 3.75 was the interest rate that we assumed when setting next year's budget. That was based on advice from Bancorp and the portfolio that we had. We are already facing challenges before the year starts in terms of it potentially going as high as 4.25. We did have a conversation with council as part of finalising the budget and decided that we wouldn't seek to increase the budget for interest, but we would look to manage a dual portfolio between interest and insurance and look to make some savings in that space. So it's just more to flag to you that that was a conversation that was had with council as part of finalising the annual plan. So in terms of the conversations we've had around the pressure on the council's budget, we're currently looking or trying to steer a deficit for the year of 2 million or below. It looked like it could have squeaked as high as 3 million, but that has been held at 2 million with some pretty significant work across the business, and roughly 1.6 of that relates to interest rates.
So, final opportunity for questions, comments? No, looks like everyone's satisfied. Thank you, Peishan. Thank you very much. Oh, monitoring report. Yes, thank you. So we'll move now to item 6.3, which is the Risk and Assurance Committee Resolutions and Actions Monitoring Report. Members will note that usually this is the last item on the agenda, but the chair, in his wisdom, decided to bring it forward. And the main reason for that is that we've obviously got a number of staff who are doing items 1 and 2, and then we're going to have to hang around for the whole length of the meeting. So we've brought it forward just to allow some people to get back some of their workday and perhaps not be here into the later hours of the evening. So, Peishan, would you like to introduce the report?
Yes, through your chair. So this is the monitoring report that has been updated to remove the 25 items that we've closed off with the auditors. So at the moment, there's only 14 items remaining open and still is underway with progress being made. Also, at the bottom of the report, there is the actions from PwC review on our GST compliance as well as PAYE compliance. And some of the keywords are being done and that we are making good progress, and that's mentioned in the report. I would like to just take questions if you have any questions as I'm taking this report as being read.
Thanks, Peishan. And before we take questions, I better correct myself because I haven't moved 2.1 and 2.2 that we received the report and that this matter decision to be recognised as not significant. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Thanks, Councillor Grimstone. All in favour? Thank you very much. Opening up for questions and comments. This all took a bit. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Jennings. So I've got 3 questions. The first one is just a matter of interest only because I've never seen it come across a council agenda before, and that's there's mention, what's the number of the item? Well, it's bottom of page 109, residential property. It's about Valvoline Farm and the Salvation Army. It's the Salvation Army one I was unsure about, so an answer offline is final. The second question is page 111 around the grants and staff reimbursements matters where due by December, but it's not started. I just wondered, is there an update on that? And then on page 119, purchasing of goods on council's account, like it's the recommendation is that council review its procedures regarding this and personal purchases going forward. Again, another one that hasn't started, but is that something we'll continue or should that cease? I wondered, is it still necessary given that it's all that allowance, I guess, seen as it's public money, unless I'm reading that wrong, and it's because it said personal purchases, but see, whereas the next one makes sense, clothing is that, I mean, that's uniform. I mean, to me, that's pretty standard, but I'm not so sure about the previous, so just want some clarity.
Peishan, Jacinta, who would like to take those questions?
I can give it a go. So there are 3 questions as I understand it.
The first one is about the Salvation Army housing arrangement. So there was an agreement that we entered into, but it was at the time without finance input, GST was charged, but we shouldn't have charged the GST because that's related to transitional housing. And so that is an item to correct the GST that we've charged. So that's question number one. Question number two is something to do with the grant. So what was found was that the overall process that we have with grant application and all that, we have been accounting for GST correctly. And so there is a comment that PwC made to make sure that finance is well aware of any processes in place for grants application and funding. So that question to do with the staff purchasing account. At the moment, through the council's account, employees are able to get discounts. So examples are resin paint. So this is no money that council is spending on behalf of the staff member. This is just purely using council's account as the means for staff to get discounts, and the charge is happening directly, meaning that when we get the invoice to pay, for example, this month, the staff members were expected to be paying back in the month. Does it answer your questions?
Did you have any follow-up questions to that?
Just that the context is helpful, and I guess it'll lead to other things later, but not for today.
Yeah. So just based on that last item, I guess the focus for this committee would that there's obviously an action there to ensure that the internal controls are strong and appropriate to manage that. That's an existing practice, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Jacinda?
I would say it's not a real benefit for staff. It is administratively, it takes more time. But it's been in place for quite a while. And for staff that are looking to paint their house or do something significant at home, it doesn't cost the council anymore, but it provides a significant benefit to staff. And so that's a reason why we sort of initially, I would say, oh no, just let's not do that. It's too much work, or it's a bit of risk. But as long as we manage it well, it's a key reason why we've tried to carry it on from that perspective.
Members, any further questions, comments?
Just a comment. I suppose the practice I've seen is that we've actually engaged with suppliers like that, and they're quite happy to actually set up another separate account and still provide the discount, but not have it coming through as a council expenditure. So maybe there's some other ways in terms of mitigating the risk and just avoiding the issue, really, but staff still getting the benefit. So maybe a bit more exploring. Yeah.
And this perhaps might be a bit beyond the scope of this committee, but perhaps the recommendation or action, it looks like obviously is as an organisation and an organisation that's trying to pitch itself as an employer of choice, perhaps that broader benefits and discounts thing could be an action to explore what that looks like with some of our partners and other suppliers. As opposed to, I don't think we need to make any sort of formal resolution around that. That's just perhaps a takeaway operational matter that we've busted right into. Any further questions, comments on the resolutions and actions list?
Sorry, one more quick one. Where you see not started on some of them, that really is a result of trying to really make significant amount of improvements all in one go. And so where you see not started, it's a conscious decision by Peshan and the team and myself to say, look, that one's not as important as some of the other things that we're really keen to tackle. Yeah.
My comment would be in that context would be really useful to be added in the comments field, because I found the comments you had captured in the areas that you had really, really clear. So if there's a purposeful decision for the timing or the delay, then I'd throw throw it in the comment, because that tells us that you flagged it and what the plan is.
Thank you, Councillor Grimstone. I think Jacinta's recording that as a takeaway. Excellent. Unless there's further questions, comments, there is a substantive motion, or a motion there that which I'll move, that the Risk and Assurance Committee notes the Risk and Assurance Committee Resolution and Actions Monitoring Report. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Member Sarah. All in favour? Thank you. All right, Peishan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 6.4, which is the Health and Safety and Wellbeing Quarterly Report. Invite Tanya and Ashley. Just while they're coming up to the table, I'll start off by moving 2.1 and 2.2, that the report be received and that this matter or decision be recognised as not significant. Can I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Grimstone. All in favour? Thank you very much. Tanya, welcome. Look, another really high quality report. Thank you. And just flagging again to members that obviously this report introduces the dashboard and also a deep dive into one of our key risk areas, which is about threatening behaviour to staff. And so I think we've walked a very fine line in terms of the information that we've put onto the agenda and into the public domain around that risk area. And so what we'll do is we'll take this in two parts. Part A, obviously the dashboard, and then Part B in terms of the deep dive. So just a reminder to members, if you want to get into some of those questions around the deep dive, please signal that to me at the time, and then we can make a decision about whether we go into committee or not. Over to you, Tanya.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, committee members. Thank you again for the opportunity to report on health, safety and wellbeing at Council and to support your due diligence as elected members. The dashboard report this meeting covers the quarter, February, March and April, with the graphs showing collated statistics for these months. There are areas where focus has been put, which include the internal audit process in the leadership section, which is page 125. These audits are monthly checks and they're led by our health and safety representatives across all our workspaces, and they do bring along other members of their teams to help with those audit checks, and we are really starting to experience improvement in the regularity of these audits. To note the graphs showing or entitled "We Review All Incidents Within 2 Weeks," and once again that's the leadership page 125. These have had a review completed, however they were outside the 2-week review period, which shows the red. New to this report and requested at the last Risk and Assurance Committee meeting is fire warden training data, which shows for our facilities of aquatics, libraries and community centres, the staff are engaged in fire warden responsibilities and training across the facility, so all staff engage in that. In the civic building, we have 20 of our 23 identified fire wardens have completed their annual training. So I've got 3 to catch up, but we are looking to roll out this training to all staff over the coming year, so that all staff once again can then engage in that fire warden space, depending who's in the building when something happens. New to the report is an eRoads driver leaderboard star rating, which gives a monthly update on the quality of driving across all our fleet vehicles. The rating is star numbered 5 to 2, down to 2, and I was really pleased to see that the majority are sitting in that 5 category month on month that we've reviewed.
Thankfully, elected members don't appear to be covered by that. No.
Yes. So included, as the Chair mentioned, is a deep dive into people behaviour, which is identified as a critical risk. There's an example of a report, learnings and improvements, and we'll follow the Chair's direction around the 2 sections. Happy to take questions.
I'm going to start you off with just a question around the health and safety audits that are mentioned in the dashboard. Just to clarify, were members of this committee or other elected members invited to? I think you invited to attend. Was it this audit or a previous one? And presumably that invitation will continue so that the members of this committee or elected members can play that slightly more active role and do those site visits.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, these audits here are specific at this moment to our internal workspace audits, so they get checked monthly for safety and healthy environment. The committee and all elected members have been invited previously to a worksite visit, which we then had to cancel for safety reasons because of the weather. But I have just put out another invite for Tuesday week for committee members and elected members to attend a site visit to the Foxton Pool. So, and I've had some positive responses, which is wonderful.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Tanya. Did members have any questions, comments? I've got one further question then, is just in terms of this is a question for the members around the table, is that in terms of the dashboard that you've received, obviously the questions, the lack of questions indicate that there's a reasonable level of comfort and again commenting on the high quality of that report. But is there anything that members around this table are wanting to see or expecting to see, would like to see, either on a routine basis or even on an ad hoc basis, coming through in terms of this reporting? I think that would be really useful feedback to the team. So, yeah.
Member Jenny.
I just think this reporting is fantastic. I can't think of anything else that I'd like, so well done to the team. A really good quality of reporting. Thank you.
Mayor Bernie.
Yeah, just a curious, Tanya, in terms of our conversation with the auditor before, how much flows into your reports flow into a full audit of council in terms of service levels and what you're doing and reporting on? I mean, is there comments from them around, the types of behaviour that we have to entertain and how we control them type of thing? Or is it just your health and safety audits that, we do rather than the wider scope, if you like?
I will direct this to Monique, but my understanding is that this doesn't necessarily come into play in terms of the audit that Audit New Zealand do, but I will just pass it on to Monique because I'm not certain on that question, Mayor Bernie.
Monique, over to you.
Audit, if we're done a health and safety audit, or let's say we've got a accreditation process coming up around WorkSafe, I think audit would be interested in the outcome of that, but they're not genuinely digging deeper on health and safety. I'm not sure if that was the question though, Mayor Bernie. Was the question more about how these audits might relate to other audits in terms of broader kind of contract project management delivery?
Well, this high standard of the reports, I would be hoping that Audit New Zealand would be streamlining their processes so they didn't have to spend a lot of time looking at our health and safety. And I would imagine that would be part of the service requirement, that we have to deliver health and safety reports all the time. And I just wondered about the extent that they dive into those, that's all.
Yeah, no, very limited. It's not a priority or a focus area for them.
Cool. Councillor Tuckabua.
I just wondered around some of the youth matters that are obviously quite the highlight, not for a good reason. And it talks about what more, and improving multi-agency communications seems to be one regarding youth.
we've got, so I chair the Youth Services Network for the Horo Whenua, where we all come together, and we've got some training coming up with Nathan Mikairi Wallace, and I wondered if that might be of benefit to, I guess, the staff who are in these different centres of ours that could, make use of his neuroscience and teenage brain and all that kind of information.
Did you want to respond?
Certainly, they would make use of that, and we can touch base to ensure that we can get some stuff on there.
Sorry, I do have a question. I'm just trying to understand your graph, if you like, in your pie chart. So it talks about, as the heading one, it talks leadership, risk management, work management, and it talks about HDC 3.33, the benchmark is 2.33, and then we go to a pie graph that lists percentages. And I'm just trying to understand what is the correlation between that, and if the benchmark is 137%, where does that come from? I'm talking, page 124, the blue page.
Thank you for your question, Mayor Bernie. Tanya will try and articulate. It took me a while to fully understand this as well, but we'll try and articulate how to read this page.
Through the chair. Thank you, Mayor Bernie, for your question, and here we go. So on the front page is an introduction which gives us the areas of the report's sections. I do struggle alongside you with having the benchmarks in decimals and then moving to percentages, but my understanding is the benchmark comes from, the benchmark has come from a group of 12 government and local government organisations, and they all complete the SAFE Plus assessment, which is the assessment tool we use, and that is where we sit compared to those 12 each month, or with this report each quarterly that comes once the statistics are all done. I have a consultant that supports me to ensure that we give current up-to-date percentages or decimals. The decimals at the top with the 2.3 and the 3.3 in the benchmark will only change when we complete another round of SAFE Plus assessment. It will always sit in that space until October this year, when we complete another SAFE Plus assessment. So that's the benchmark as our council compared to a group of 12. I hope
Does that help your understanding, maybe?
And just the benchmark index at being at 137%. I always felt that the best you could do was 100. So I'm just at a bit of a loss as to understand why it's so at that level.
I probably can't just explain that right now, but I can get that answer for you, because I think I have asked this question before, but it's just not coming to me clearly enough for this setting. Sorry.
You're happy to follow up with Mayor Bernie separate to the meeting, I think. Yep, no.
Through to the committee chair.
Any further questions, comments?
Yeah, my question, I tend to recall, and you may be able to correct me, when we last sort of looked at this dashboard, we spoke about that we weren't at leading, but that's where we want these spaces to be up. And certainly it looks like most of these measures have moved a little bit closer to where we want to be. So I guess, what are the couple of key focus areas for this quarter that's going to drive that next incremental improvement. Probably in that risk management space.
So there are a few things that we're focusing on at the moment, and one of those is the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Action Plan. So we would generally do a strategic plan and an annual plan each year. This year we have decided that we're going to do an action plan which is going to identify actions that we can complete over the next 3 years to help us get to that leading organisation. We have completed engagement with staff. We have one-on-one face-to-face engagement. We have met with 167 staff where they've provided feedback specifically on wellbeing. So how what can we do as an organisation to get us to leading in the wellbeing space? They have specifically asked questions as a team, so the team that they specifically work in, how as a team can they help us get to that leading space? And then as an organisation, what can we do? So from that, we're in the analysis stage at the moment. There are some fantastic ideas that have come up. Some are quick ones where we can actually just implement them then and there, which will be those things that in the next quarter we'll be aiming to do. Some of those are as simple as some teams do it, other teams don't. So just getting that consistency across the board. And there are some really fantastic ideas that have come up where it will take us a couple of years to actually embed and implement those. So in the next quarter, it will be doing the analysis of the action plan. The next RAC meeting, we'll be bringing that back to this group to have a discussion on and have a session as how do we think as a governance body that we can get there as well. So that's our real focus for the next quarter is those quick wins and then doing that analysis. We always have a focus on the leadership, risk management and worker engagement. So it's BAU for us. We're constantly kind of pushing staff and ensuring that we meet our obligations that we should do just as part of BAU as well.
Councillor Grimstone, yeah, happy? Excellent. Any further questions, comments before we move into the Part B deep dive? Looks like we can move into the deep dive. Oh,
sorry, I just wanted to make one more note. On page 129, in addition to this report, is how we're engaging with the contractors that came through either the previous or the meeting previous to that. So we've just put in a quick note there that we are now sitting on health and safety committees of the contractors, or we're actually regularly engaging with them, doing site visits, catching up with their health and safety advisors as well to ensure that our relationship's growing and fostering there.
thanks, Ash. That's really, really, really positive. Thank you. Oh, yes. Member Sarah.
Sorry, just in relation to that, could I ask whether or not when you engage a contractor that they sign up to the health and safety policy of the council?
Yes, so they do through the contract. They sign up, and we also have a discussion to ensure that their health and safety is suitable, but that also they're meeting our requirements as well, and they have to be site-wise accredited to also work for us.
Okay. Just on that point, what have we come across any instances where their health and safety internal policies and procedures are in conflict or inconsistent with ours, and what have we done to resolve that? Or what would we do to resolve that?
Yes, we have, and it depends on the circumstance. So where there is inconsistency, but they might be a consultant who just do desk work versus, I shouldn't say just do, but sit at a desk and do work versus being out on site. Apologies. Where it is very differing, we don't tend to use contractors that aren't site-wise accredited, because that is the process that we've signed up to, and that is it's a hard process to get that accreditation, and we know that they are then suitable and safe to use. There are a few contractors that we've previously used, one-man bands, that we pre-qualify them internally. So we ensure through staff and Tanya to ensure that they still meet our requirements, but they might not sit in that system. There are only a couple of those contractors. If they don't meet our requirements, we don't use them. That's the end of it. So we work with them to ensure that they can meet it, but if they can't, then we don't put our staff or the community in that position.
Thanks, Ashley. I've got a hand up from CEO Monique.
Well, I just thought I'd offer an example of where it might not contradict our health and safety policy, but it might.
Sorry, Monique, we've just lost you there momentarily. Could you start again? Could you just start again, Monique? Sorry, we lost you there momentarily.
I thought I would offer an example of where our health and safety policy isn't necessarily contradictory, but where another policy of council that has a health and safety lens might be in contradiction with a contractor. And so I think a really good example, it's a policy that actually we're currently reviewing internally, is our drug and alcohol policy. And so currently our kind of zero tolerance to any alcohol when you're driving a council vehicle, that's quite different to what we see in a lot of our contractors' policies around the legal limit. And then we have other really practical examples of where it might not be in a policy per se, but where we see differences between contractors, and sometimes we have more than one contractor working on a site. So for example, the type of the steel cap shoe that needs to be required versus the covered shoe. So there's lots of, we could give lots of little examples, or we could give lots of big examples, but all of them require conversations and obviously resolution.
Thanks, Monique. Excellent. All right, I'm proposing that we move now into your part B, which is the deep dive around the particular focus area of threatening behaviour towards staff. Tony, did you want to make any sort of opening comments, or are you happy to just go straight into questions? Just reminding elected members, pretty keen for you to signal if there's something you want to get really into the detail, and Ashley and Monique and Jacinta will jump up if we think we're getting into a space where we need to go public excluded.
Chair, happy to take questions, thank you.
All right, team, has anyone got any questions, comments about in terms of the deep dive? Well, I might start us off. Just in relation to, and I'll find the page, which was page 138 in terms of the current controls. I guess my question is that are there further controls that you would consider or look at if funding was prioritised and provided? You know, are there some additional controls that where budget allocation may be a current constraint?
I think resourcing to training is always really important. That would support staff to be confident to handle whatever may come their way wherever they are working. So as with people behaviour and threatening behaviours, it can happen anywhere, anytime. It may look like it could be in the facilities more, but it has happened on the street, having a label on you saying your council or something like that. So I think training is a really great place to put resources, and ensuring we capture that in a regular manner that gets our new staff and refreshes our more experienced staff. So a range of training would be my top of the tick list.
Just to add to that, one of the things that we do on a yearly basis is we put a training plan in place so we can identify, so we look back at the previous year and assess what has been happening, and then we can focus that the next year, because it is a very limited budget and there are a number of staff, and we need to kind of focus that budget on the areas that really matter. So we do look back to the previous years, take this data and then analyse it to be like, okay, this is the information, or this is the type of training that we need to roll out for that year. So we always look at it that way to ensure it's the right type of training, and it's broad in the sense that lots of different people can benefit from that. But yeah, resourcing.
Thanks, Ashley. Just a further question on page 135. It's got some numbers there of incidents, and the one that interests me was under HDC Civic. there's 4 around animal control, and I don't know whether it was because it's not within the scope of the deep dive, but are we seeing a further category? I thought one of those sort of high, one of those sort of intense situations would often be at the pound, or where there's sort of dog-related interactions or animal interactions. Is that? Can you speak to that? Is that something that is there? Are we just not seeing this type of incident in our dog pounds, or is that not quite within the scope of this deep dive?
Excuse me, Chair, just to clarify, are you meaning physically at the dog pounds, whereas here with the animal control, meaning it could be at the dog pound or it could be when they're working?
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to understand. I had a perception in my mind that this would be one of those areas where we would see potentially some undesirable, threatening behaviour in interactions related to dogs. And I'm just trying to clarify, is this number here on that page 135 about physically occurring in the civic building, or does that number extend across both in the field and dog pounds? Yeah.
So I guess for our reporting, which is a good point for us to note, is we've split it into the 3, and that's how we capture it. So we capture it from our libraries, we capture it from aquatics, and then we capture it for civic. So that's not here in the civic building. That's they in the category of reporting, they sit under that civic function. This is out in the field. This is at the pound. One thing to note is that aggressive behaviour is reported to the level of the tolerance that people can take. So some people can take being yelled at and might not be affected. We try and promote that they report. However, the level someone can take in terms of aggressive or any sorts of swearing or not physical, but the kind of level that they can take differs from person to person. So animal control might necessarily get more, but they are used to it, or they don't have that level of tolerance might be high. Not that we accept it, but we are trying to ensure that they still report it, but that level of tolerance is different for every person.
So it does appear, based on the numbers, that it's more adults behaving badly than youths, but just to focus in on the youth incidents at both libraries and aquatics, and picking up on Councillor Tukapua's point about that neuroscience of youths, is there potentially some scope to do some more, or get some more information about how we actually are dealing with sort of unique responses and how we might have to sort of tailor our response to deal with youths as opposed to our badly behaving adults?
Thank you for the question. I think there is also to take into account that libraries and aquatics are exceptionally good reporters. They have a very mature approach to health and safety reporting, and they let us know everything that happens. So their statistics, their environment and statistics are higher. I think there is some very good work occurring currently in the libraries area to give more support around youth. Certainly if you've been into the youth space recently, the upgrades are just fantastic, so that positive environment, encouraging positive behaviour, I think will be really important. Some of our staff there are just exceptional, so I'm really hoping engaging with Councillor Tukapua's connections and ensuring our staff view of their customers is sort of consistent, I suppose, that we don't always treat people differently. So I think we can always improve, but I'm hoping what I'm seeing, it's been really good.
And one of the things to note within that, our libraries and community centres, there was a period of time where we were getting a lot of incidents, would have been a lot higher than the numbers that we have here, and they were actually happening in our space, where we're now finding that a lot of this is happening outside of our space and it's coming into the space. So we report it because it is happening in the end coming in, but a lot of it is happening outside and then they're coming in for that support. So
not positive at all to have to report these numbers, but positive in the fact that it's not necessarily starting or happening in this space, which it used to happen that way.
You know, I think I share that to be able to manage these things, we need to measure them. So encouraging and providing that effective system of reporting is really, really important. Members, Councillor Grimstone.
I just noted one of the controls that is here refers to duress in all facilities. So does that relate to every staff member having a personal duress alarm, or are we talking about buttons randomly spread throughout facilities? Can you just tell me what that looks like?
They are the buttons put in specific service areas throughout our facilities. Staff in the libraries and aquatics also carry RTs, radios on themselves, so that they can communicate easily across their large spaces. And then the duress buttons are set at the service counters.
Did you want to make some further comments, Ashley?
No, I was just going to say apologies. Tanya has to leave because she is doing an event at Te Tākeretanga Okorohaupo for the events schedule that they're doing, and she's talking about health and safety and events planning for council. So it is at 5:30, so she's just going to excuse herself from the table, but any other questions I can answer.
Thank you very much, Tanya. And I think equally the Chief Executive has also mentioned that she needs to jump off the Zoom at 5:30. So sorry to have kept you, but thank you very much for your responses and, again, the high quality of the material that you put in front of us.
Thank you.
Happy
members,
to take any other
is there any
questions.
further questions that we can direct via Ashley, or are you happy to leave there? Councillor Grimstone.
I guess actually just leading on, because certainly the escalations that have been reported here seem to be more verbal than physical, or physical on staff. But is there a risk or consideration to look at building in some more safe zones for staff? Because particularly in the library, I get the concept they're quite open in all their spaces, that if there was a physical incident that happened, there's no physical barriers there between an offender and a staff member. Have there been any consideration given to that aspect?
So after the incident of the assault that happened last year, we have specifically been looking at the redesign of the front of house here, and that is something that we will have to come back to council with in terms of budget and funding, and that's specifically to ensure that there is a safe area for them to have a quick exit if something was to happen. I know that there has been OPSEC, which is kind of the safe space review done on all of our sites, and that's taken into consideration, but not recently have they looked at those spaces. But I will hand over to Brent, just because I am not an expert in terms of the facilities around their customer facing areas.
Thanks, Ash, and through you, Mr. Chairman. Acknowledge that Te Tākeretanga Okorohaupo is a particularly large space and does pose a lot of challenges. However, we have identified areas where staff can go in an incident. We have the meeting rooms that are lockable. We have the returns room, and as well between the youth space and the main space and upstairs, there are areas that have been identified as safe zones for staff through that OPSEC report and through other reports that have been done.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Sorry, I did have another one, and it was more a thought. The verbal telephone process. So we physically trespass someone if they've been naughty in the library or at the poll, right? But if they get verbal over the telephone, do we have an ability to effectively trespass that phone number from phoning council again as a bit of a control, or are the incidents so few that it wouldn't be worth investigating that option?
I'm not certain on that, but I do know that when they do get aggressive phone calls, they will report those, especially if they're continuously aggressive people. You often know who those people are, or they're the repeat offenders, and they will get identified and reported through that. In terms of how the phone system works, I'm not certain on that. Brent, do you have anything to add? But that's something that we can come back and let you know.
Yeah, I'd probably have to check whether we can blacklist the number of trespasser and through our system. Through the front of house, the aggressive, as Ash mentioned, the aggressive behaviour does get noted, particularly if there's any threats or anything like made, it does get reported and escalated as appropriate. But in terms of the phone system itself, I'd have to do a little bit of digging to come back to you on that one, Mr. Crimson.
One strategy could be just to direct all the phone calls to the mayor. I think that might be,
The mayor's good at hanging up.
Look, team.
Sorry, can I just add one thing? One of the processes, obviously, to try and de-escalate the phone call, but the staff are also made aware that if they are repeatedly being yelled at, that it's actually okay to hang up the call, and for their safety. So they are made aware of that. They don't have to actually continue on the phone call and try and continue to de-escalate if that's not working, that they're actually okay to just hang the phone call up.
Thanks, Ashley. I think we will leave that matter there. I think really appreciate the opportunity to deep dive, and I think this is obviously the intention is that we'll do a further deep dive in future. Did you want to signal what that might be now, or just leave that?
We'll just leave it. It'll be on the work plan, but I can't remember off the top of my head, sorry.
Thank you very much. I don't know if we've got any recent note. Excellent. So what we're going to do now is move to item 6.5, which is the insurance renewal strategy update. Invite Rob to come to the table. I'll start us off with moving 2.1 and 2.2, that we received the report and that this matter or decision be recognised as not significant. Could I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Mayor Burney. All in favour? Thank you. Rob, welcome. And before you jump into it, can I just take a brief moment to thank you for all of your really hard work around the risk work, which we're coming to, but particularly for bringing, for the work you've put into this paper, because I think this is something that I don't think has come to council before, and obviously acknowledging that it is, very operational in nature, but providing that visibility through to this committee is, I think, a really, really positive step. And again, just to thank you for bringing it and inviting the discussion, I guess. So thank you to you and Ashley. Over to you to introduce the report, and then you feel free to sort of provide the structure that you'd like to follow in terms of getting any feedback that you're looking for.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee members. It's the renewal document is an interesting beast, and I will say beast because it has grown quite significantly since I started looking at the framework earlier in the year. The important thing, I think the most important thing to understand is that generally from a local government perspective, we wrap our insurance into the MWLAS, and which can be a fatal mistake if you think that we wrap our policies into that LAS as well. But the only benefit from wrapping it into the LAS is probably a financial benefit from a holistic perspective and getting better premiums as a collective. The mistake that we make often, or that has been made in the past, that we can take the same line as other councils in respect to our assessments of our risk. It's important that from a renewal perspective, we look at several factors as per the report, and to make a more accurate renewal document that is specific to the Horowhenua district, really. The main factors for us is the level of risk that we're faced with here from a hazard perspective. So from a hazard mapping perspective, whilst the size of the amount or the value of our assets is important, more importantly is, and as witnessed with Cyclone Gabriel, is the level of damage that we think a particular event might cause. So we might have $1 billion worth of assets, but an event might only cause $100 million worth of damage. Whilst $13 billion was reported, or $12 to $13 billion was reported across the communities within Cyclone Gabriel, the impact on councils on my last discussion with Aon was around 109 million. So significantly less, and across full councils, including the regional council. At the moment, from a policy perspective and a material damage and business interruption perspective, through the LAS, we've opted for two levels. One is the initial level of material damage and business interruption, and then we've gone for an excess layer, which the first layer takes us to 150 million, thereabouts, and the excess layer takes us to 300 million. Now, that travels across 6 or 7 councils in the NWLAS, and effectively, if we were to measure that against Cyclone Gabriel, we're probably overprescribed. Now, when you measure that against the risks associated, and I'm undertaking a risk assessment report at the moment, so it does quantify what I'm saying. When you look at that against the risks associated with Horowhenua District, the two major risks that we're faced with here that could cause significant damage would either be a cyclone or a tornado and an earthquake. So we have to probably assess a lot wide-scale damage against those types of incidents. When you look at a tsunami or flood damage and through horizons and the mapping that they've done, Horowhenua isn't exposed to widespread flooding. Now, what I mean by that is damage that will totally obliterate our assets. And that's the other thing you got to understand, is where our assets sit against things like the Manawatu River. So all that needs to be considered when we are setting our level of insurance that we need, our deductibles, which is the excess we pay. From a renewal perspective, there are several approaches that we need to consider, and that's where we're heading, and that's where the paper pretty much derives to. So if you've had an opportunity to read that, I'm open to questions.
Thanks, Rob. Look, and again, I guess this is essentially the operational plan of attack, and that really what you're trying to do through this paper is demonstrate how the organisation is planning to progress in this insurance space. And so again, just a flag to members of the committee, again, we're probably lifting the bonnet on this, and we're being very open with both the community and this committee around what we're planning to do in this space. And so the risk with that is that obviously there's some further discussions to have with insurance providers. And so if you want to get into some conversations or questions around strategy, or that might touch on our negotiations, again, we might need to go into public excluded. So before we open up to questions, I thought I'd just reflect on two sort of key figures that came through in the report, which was that we've spent $5 million on premiums over the last 3 years, with $87,000 in claims, $97,000 in claims, with $87,000 paid out, and significant difference there. And also the risk warning around the premiums and the trajectory there in terms of expectation that premiums will rise in that 10 to 15% range. So clearly there is obviously a basis for us to look at the things that you're looking at and really appreciate your efforts in there. Open up to questions, comments around the table. Definitely keen for members to drill into some of the detail. Councillor Tukapua.
Yeah, I'm glad you said what you said about the level of claims versus how much we paid out, because this was that stood out to me. But I did want to ask one question around your premium forecast table. The matter that new contract works policy for Foxton Pools is on there. I just wondered why we didn't have a new contract works for the Waitarere Surf Club, which is being built on a sensitive area that is a sand dune, and why we wouldn't have, I guess, had a similar line.
Sorry, Councillor Takapua, there is insurance on the Waitarere Surf Club, but that's held by the contractor. Foxton's held by us, the pool is held by us.
So is your response to that question that the contracting mechanism means that where we've got a contractor, Apollo, doing the pool, that we've retained that risk or a certain level of risk and had to insure it, whereas Waitarere Surf Life Saving Club, through our contracting mechanism, we've essentially transferred most of that risk out. Is that from here?
Sorry, through your chair, that is correct.
So, can I just pick up on that question and drill into that? So, how do we make that decision about when it's appropriate to do that? Is that through the project planning or through the procurement stages? When are we making that determination?
The biggest difference between the two is that we are insuring an existing building at Waitarere, which we probably won't reinsure going into the fact that we're getting a brand new building. However, with the Foxton, Brent, have you got more insight to the Foxton pool? But with the Foxton pool, there's a level of the work by the well, the fact is that we still own the pool. It's the work that they're doing around it, so we still assume a lot of the insurance, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So in this case, the key difference is that it's new build versus renovation to an existing. Okay.
I would just add that if through us retaining the insurance, there's no margins applied or anything through the contractors. If it's going through the likes of a third party contractor, it stays with us.
I did have others, but I'll give room, and then if that's not covered.
Member Sarah.
Thanks. I see that we're with Aon at the moment. When was the last time we went to tender on this? I was just wondering if it's appropriate to look at that as well.
That's on a series.
Sorry.
Through the chair, Member Karen, it's to my knowledge, I wouldn't know, so I couldn't really answer that. Do you understand? But however, because we do it through the LAS, we've sort of we're tied into Aon, but there's nothing precluding us from going outside that.
We have been with Aon for some time, but I'm not entirely sure how long. But we can get some information on that and come back.
Would it be fair to say that thinking about this plan in terms of our insurance process, that the real benefits, if it's implemented, come for the 24-25 year? Like there's obviously some benefits and some savings for the year immediately in front of us, but the real benefit flows sort of about a year later, and so in theory that gives us some time between now and even aligning it to the long-term plan or those processes, that there is that scope for discussions around how we might procure a supplier going forward.
Through your chair. Yes, and I guess one of the biggest issues we had this year was time frames from a renewal perspective. Generally, we would start this work in October. We started in February. But member Sarah, my apologies, raises a good point. And one of the concerns I have, without being too controversial, is that going through the MWLAS really does only offer the benefit from a premium perspective, and we do need to go out from a procurement perspective in the long term to see what the market offers. As a separate part, and as in the risk report, we are doing a strategy, an insurance renewal strategy, and the reason we're doing that strategy is over the years, from a renewal perspective, there's some real parts of our renewal process that have fallen down, including that. And so we've fallen into the trap of almost like a Groundhog Day when it comes to renewal. We will set business rules through the insurance renewal strategy and ensuring that all those sorts of things are checked off on an annual basis.
Did you want to?
Yeah, just one quick thing to mention was around so for me, some of the big things are around, and they'll be mentioned, but around our the level of deductibles that we have. We've got some really low deductibles here, and the fact that we've been really conservative in terms of what we cover. For example, assets that we won't replace are likely not to replace if they were damaged. So things like that will make a significant difference in and of themselves. But then there is looking at what providers we have as well.
Members here?
Comment to that is just I completely agree with you that we have got some low deductibles. I think if we've got somebody that we are partnering with in this insurance, then they ought to be providing advice on a lot of those things. And I think there's just a challenge as to whether or not going with somebody continually and everything you've mentioned, I get. But if we've got that there's an opportunity, I think, if we go to tender, for somebody else to come in and give us a lot more advice on some of these deductible levels, some things that we shouldn't necessarily be insuring, etc. It's usually quite an interesting exercise.
Well, through your chair, Member Sarah's pretty much hit the nail on the head.
Look, I think, Matt.
This might be a question for Jacinta. $10 million of our debt portfolio is for a contingency, that we keep $10 million worth of cash floating around our bank account so that if we do have any unexpected major issues, that we've got that backup there. And I just wondered, two questions. Do we still need that in light of what we've got in cover for the insurance? And just thinking about the interest on that $10 million, even though it's debt and we're probably gaining some interest ourselves on it, whether we're still on the right side of the equation.
Thanks. In terms of the approach, we now do it slightly differently in that rather than actually have the cash and hold it there, we have access to line of credit facilities equal to $30 million that we can draw on at any time, $20 million with the LGFA and $10 million with BNZ, so that from a rating agency perspective, we've got liquidity. We can access $30 million when we need to, but also we're paying a line fee for that, but we also then don't need to worry about having that cash sitting there. Yeah.
Yeah, Rob, I'll just comment, and I appreciate this is getting a little bit operational, but one of the comments you include in the report is just how certain decisions can have then a flow-on impact. And it was, you gave an example of the skinning or the wrapping of vehicles, and by putting branding on the car, that increases the value of the car, and therefore that then has a flow-on impact in terms of insurance costs. And I think it's good to have that kind of thinking around, well, yeah, what is the implication? Not saying we don't want to wrap vehicles, but just understanding if we do X, it means Y, and then we end up with Z. So I think that is a valuable piece of work, and gleaning that understanding to understand the consequences of other decisions.
And the point that sits alongside that, your chair, is that also from when you belong to a collective, then you're bound by the decisions that collective makes, and so from a car perspective, we have glass coverage, but the insurance companies, when we make a claim on glass, they add that onto your next year's premium plus 20%. So effectively, we should be paying for our glass up front from our operating budget rather than having a coverage in insurance. So, and the other thing is too, from a LAS perspective, those premiums, if we're a small council beside a very large council or larger councils, and they have a lot more vehicles than us, then we're subject to their damages as well. So there are pros and cons with it, but I think that's one of the reasons we also need to bring other brokers into the market and to have a look at what they can offer.
Is there, Councillor Tukubu, did you have some further questions you wanted to explore?
I'm comfortable with what's, and just cut to the chase.
Well, one question before we talk about endorsing the substantive motion is just this idea that that if we proceed as you're planning, we'll realise some savings, and the intention is that those savings then translate into a rates reduction. Essentially, there's the less requirement for potentially, it offsets potentially some of the increase through premiums, but also potentially reduces that rates burden. But my question is around potentially less in early years, the potential for ring fencing some of those savings, perhaps to reinvest back into business continuity, risk management, resilience type activities within council, and whether there's been any consideration of that or whether there's any constraints around that. Because if there was appetite around this committee table, I think that that's something that we might like to consider signalling or recommending to council that might be something we'd like to consider.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, absolutely. That could be another option is around putting that into a self-insurance reserve. That could be available for example, if we reduce or increase our deductibles, then we'd have something to fund those purchases, not the purchases, but the replacement should that be needed. So that's I guess from a risk management and insurance, if we're pushing the boat out a little bit on insurance, that's one thing to think about. Another thing is also making sure within our borrowings that we always have that capacity within our borrowings for the unexpected as well.
Can I get a sense around the table whether there would be appetite or support to make that kind of recommendation or signal that to a council?
I'm just wondering if we are counting our chickens before they hatch. This is a really challenging and unforgiving space. What we've seen with insurance premiums rocketing up over the last few years, you may think you can get some little wins on the deductibles, but it just gets munched up with other things. So, maybe we need to understand where the savings land before we get too excited would be my advice. Unfortunately, I wish it wasn't like that.
I appreciate that advice.
My only comment would be I'd be worried about the unintended consequences of putting money aside in a bucket and then trying to keep rates down at the other side of things by then taking away from other services that we deliver. And I just think there's it's a wider conversation that we need to have.
No, I appreciate those views. Member Sarah.
I think I endorse probably exactly what Jenny said and Bernie, and that I think we just need to be careful, because if we decide that we're going to increase the deductibles, there's more that we're taking on and that we're self-insuring for as well. So maybe not immediately, that we just probably need to see where things land, and then hopefully there is that opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you for all of those who did it. Do other members want to express a view? I mean, I think there's a pretty clear feeling. If a nod of the head if you're happy or comfortable with that sort of direction. Okay. Is there any further questions or commentary on the report and the direction of travel before I put 2.3? All right, well, I'd like to move 2.3 that the Risk and Insurance Committee endorse the proposed planned approach for the insurance renewal. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Member Jenny. Is there any discussion or debate on that? No? Or I'll put the motion. All in favour? Right, thank you very much. What we'll do, thank you, Rob and Ashley. What we'll do now is we'll move on to, actually, I'll just check in with members. We were scheduled to finish at 5:30 and it's now 10 to 6. Obviously, very meaty agenda. Would people like to take a break now and come back in, say, 20 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? I think there's a signal. Who wants a break? Okay, you can. Is that all right? Yep. All right. We'll keep going because we're now at the halfway point of the agenda. So I think we'll move to item 6.6, which is the risk management status quarterly report, June 2023. We'll move 2.1 and 2.2 that the report be received and that this matter or decision be recognised as not significant. I have a seconder for that. Thank you, Mayor Birdie. All in favour? Thank you. Rob, back over to you. You've got a number of elements that we need to work through, so I don't know if you want to just talk to it generally or each individual item in your hands.
Okay, cool. Just in a quick summary, as you can imagine, the last 3 months have been significantly busy from a risk perspective, and from a risk maturity perspective, it's great to see the movement that we're starting to make from an organisational perspective. As tabled at the last meeting was the risk management framework and the risk management strategy and work plan, where a good amount of feedback was provided around the wording being used and the consistency, introducing an assessment, what our risk assessment framework would be, and just more consistency in the document. So I think first off the agenda is to resubmit those for endorsement to go to council. So is that the way you wanted to play it, Chair?
Yeah, look, I think we might do it that way. I think it might be easier to dispense with those each of those elements, and then that gives us scope to go into committee if members would like to talk about specific items on the risk register, if that's needed. So let's start. What I might do is I might get you to talk to the draft risk management framework first, or answer any questions that the committee might have, and then we'll move into the following.
Okay. So from a framework perspective, you got a very good induction to that in the last meeting, and I think understand what is trying to be achieved through that document. So the changes have been made as per the feedback, so I'm open to questions if that's...
Do I have some questions around? Councillor Tukuba.
Page 162, under the appetite framework, obviously taken on board feedback and changed tact, and now we're aligning to the 5 community outcomes, the top 10 priorities, plan on a page, etc. And then in that last paragraph, it talks about a survey that was conducted and how this informs or has informed the appetite as well, albeit a small part. But I guess some councillors provided feedback. I was one of them. I'm not sure how many altogether, but I didn't get a reply. So I'm wondering if you've got a response to what was brought to your attention, and I can provide that detail if now's a good time. And it was just around the survey. So, for example, the first question gave that bridge versus something else scenario, and effectively a trade-off. But for me, I couldn't get answers, and obviously that's how the survey was conducted. But for me, when I assess or consider risks of this versus that, it's about, well, how many people does that bridge serve on a daily basis? Is it part of the highway network or a back road? That's our responsibility. And like, is there an alternate route available, or is this the only access? How much will it cost and how long will it take? And are there any other options or opportunities, when you look at the bigger picture? So for me, it's not straightforward. I struggle to answer, is it the bridge or is it that, without some level of detail. And yeah, that's how, that's just, that's just how my brain works. I'm not saying everyone's like that, but those things are important, and because I didn't get an answer, I'm not sure how this feedback has been considered or at all.
Through your chair, Councillor Takapua, my apologies for not providing a reply. You finished your email with, I look forward to the results, I think. And so I thought that you weren't looking for an answer. The feedback that you provided was similar to two other members' questions, and what we're looking through, we've got a workshop to go yet, which is is based on our top 10 priorities that come out of our 5 community outcomes. And that's done collectively, where often people's thoughts or discussions can influence people where they sit, which is great, and that's why we're doing it from a workshop perspective. One of the reasons we put the survey in there, and I got this advice from Hastings District Council because they did it the same way and were quite successful in forming their appetite, was to get a snapshot from individuals to where they stood on certain points against the community outcomes. Now, a number of councillors would have liked a middle ground in respect to strongly agree or disagree. The only problem when you have a middle ground in a survey of this type is you cannot derive any meaning from the survey if everyone puts middle ground, because we're looking for an appetite perspective. So the survey its intent was to put you on the spot in respect to having to make a decision without those things that balance out an argument often when you're around this table and making a decision. It's a very small snapshot purely based on the 5 community outcomes, and it gives me a good understanding when forming our statement. Now, that sits alongside the workshop, as well as I think one of the good things about the feedback that we got from our first workshop was that in the past our appetite has been a couple of paragraphs and it's been very generic, and it hasn't been specific to anything other than what we do as a business overall rather than what our community outcomes is. And so I took an interest in Hastings District Council, who presented at a risk conference, to how they had been more successful, because the councillors had reacted to the fact that the risk appetite meant something. It meant something against our deliverables, and so when they made decisions. The good thing about the second workshop, which we're about to do, is that it's given me actual time to understand where the council sits on certain decisions, especially around the long-term plan amendment, to see where our appetite sat. So there's a number of collective things that are going to contribute to our appetite. Whilst it's an important document, we want it to be as accurate as possible in providing exactly where we sit, providing visibility to the organisation and the community to where we sit on certain matters. And partnerships is a wonderful example in that. And so one of the questions in the survey was based around that. And the survey's results were really interesting, but in line with how council voted last time. So it's given me a strong indication to where we sit on appetite on our partnerships part. And the survey confirmed that for me, because if I had allowed people to sit in the middle and on trade-offs, I wouldn't have got that indicator. So that's why we've taken that approach. Does that make sense? So it's not just one thing. The survey's a very small part of it, but it's helping me form an appetite overall for each of our outcomes.
Like I hear you, it's a yes or no, or it's a this or that. But decisions are made like that. It's you're for it or you're against it. And so you've considered a report which gives you a level of detail so that you can justify why you went for, why you went against. And I guess at the end of the day, I feel accountable to the community unless I can articulate myself. When, someone pulls me up in the supermarket, I've got an answer. Yeah.
In respect that this is only really used against a statement rather than an overall opinion or where you sit on a vote.
Rob, I guess the other thing is I take the point that it's just to inform or guide. Did you have sufficient responses from elected members to feel comfortable that you could use that to inform?
Through your chair, yes, we 99%, which Hastings District Council got 75%, so I was really pleased with that. We also did the executive as well to see if there was any differences between the two, but
I look forward to workshopping that one then.
I think everybody would be quite interested in the results because they were, some of them surprised me.
The mayor was just questioning, I think I've just heard, saying, what was the response rate to the survey?
99%. So 100% of ELT and 11 of the 13.
But I guess to wrap up that conversation, so essentially you're satisfied that as a tool that you use to inform you in acknowledging the limitations that Councillor Tukapu has outlined, that obviously usually we make decisions with a broader context, that you are using this specifically as a kind of a blunt tool to help you inform those extremes. Is that a fair representation?
Very much so, and even from a lot, as witnessed through the long-term amendment, there were some very close splits. There were some 7-6s, and so that's really hard to determine where we sit from an appetite perspective. So as much information as I can gather, and we'll get to talk about our top 10 priorities a lot more in depth, where you'll be able to balance out against trade-offs. And actually, we have changed our direction quite significantly around this workshop in our top 10 priorities, and used a glass half full approach rather than a glass half empty. And to explain that quickly, we're looking often we look at the adverse appetite, so we have no appetite for financial loss or anything like that, but we've used scenarios that look at a more favourable approach.
And so, sorry, just to close the loop on that, so the appetite statement is going to be subject of a further workshop with the full council prior to it then? Will it come back to this committee or will it go up to council at that point?
The next workshop is with council, and then it'll pretty much, I think, go back to council.
Yeah, so what we wanted to do was bring back the draft risk appetite from the feedback that was received, which is going into more detail and looking at the opportunity there, bring back to this committee and ensure that get some endorsement to know whether or not we're on the right track, and then we'll have the workshop with full council, and then it will go up for adoption.
All right, so I'll focus the conversation then back on the draft risk management framework. Before I do that, I will just ask so that in terms of the appetite statement in that workshop, can we ensure that we extend the invitation to independent members so that we can have their wisdom and input through that process, even though it's not coming formally through this committee?
Certainly.
So then, just focusing on the draft risk management framework, does anybody have any questions or comments specifically on that before I put the motion that's on the table?
Just briefly, it was good to see the feedback that we provided basically reflected back in the document, and it was no surprises to me, and I thought it was well done.
Ashley? All right, well, if there's no further comments or questions on that specific item, what I'll do is I'll move 2.3, that the Risk and Assurance Committee endorse the draft risk management framework. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Young? Any debate or discussion around that? No? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Thank you. So now we come to the draft risk strategy and work plan. Did you want to introduce that briefly, or just want to head straight into questions and comments?
Through your chair, just that you can go straight into comments. The major change again was the feedback, was minor changes. The feedback on the strategy was a lot less. What has changed quite a bit is the work plan. Obviously, as we're evolving and moving in our maturity, more is going on to that work plan. However, and even once the strategy is adopted, that work plan will continue to evolve.
And so the best page perhaps for members of the committee to focus in on is page 201, which has a summary table of all the specific elements and the proposed actions and timeline, or the year in which it will fall. Is there any comments or questions on the risk strategy or work plan? There being none, what I'll do is I'll put move 2.4, that the Risk and Assurance Committee endorse the draft risk strategy and work plan. Could I have a seconder for that? Member Sarah? Any debate and discussion? Don't think so. Put the motion. All in favour? Thank you very much. What we'll do now is how do members feel about getting into the risk register? Would you like to go into committee now and potentially have that discussion, or park that to the end? Do I have any views around that? We can talk about the risk register at a level where we may not even need to go into public excluded if people don't want to get into too many. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So what we'll do, Ashley and Rob, if that's all right, we'll close off item 6.6 and then we'll go into committee at the end of the meeting and have a bit more of a discussion around those risks. And obviously we've got the benefit of the general managers who are the ultimate owners of the risks and who we're going to scrutinise around some of those.
Yeah, happy with that. I just wondered if there were any questions around the quarterly report on the risk, and then also whether or not the way that the risk appetite framework has been written, if that you're comfortable to continue with that.
So I'll start that then. First, comments, questions about the quarterly report, if there were any, just final comments there, and then I'll deal with the appetite statement separately, if that's all right. Looks like none. So on the appetite statement, I'm happy to signal that I would be quite keen to sort of engage with that a little bit more and perhaps provide some commentary by email and copy in the committee to that. For me, I just need a little bit more time to get my head around it ahead of a workshop. I don't know if other members agree with that, but certainly like the direction of travel is probably just looking at that in a little bit more detail and providing some useful feedback. Did any member have a contrary view or have any views around the appetite statement? All right. Sounds like that's the consensus views that will provide some feedback offline. All right, thank you very much. We'll conclude 6.6 and now move into item 6.7. I think that, are you up for this one, Ron, or are you? Oh, it's Ashley. So item 6.7 is the internal audit work program. I'd like to move 2.1 and 2.2 that those report be received and that the matter or decision be recognised as not significant. Seconded by Councillor Tukapua. All in favour? Thank you. Ashley, over to you.
Thank you. So I just want to talk about the purpose of this report, which is to provide you with a suggested approach of the internal work program and ask for endorsement to utilise the funds of $51,000 to fix the known areas for improvement instead of using it to complete audits on additional areas. We know that there are some areas for improvement, noting that being the fringe benefit tax, business continuity program and planning, which has already been mentioned earlier in the meeting, cyber security, and then also some financial policies. We look to do this work in-house with staff, but also look to use some of those funds to tap into external resources when needed. The approach is a change from what we've done previous years. However, we know that we know that these are areas where we need some improvements and we want to hone in on those and get those right instead of identifying others. Happy to take any questions.
So essentially, summarising the proposal, it's to do and fix stuff rather than review and or validate things. And we're acknowledging the phase that we're in terms of the organisation's journey in terms of strengthening and improving.
Correct. What we want to do is we want to get stuck in and do the stuff that we know we need to do improvements on, and then look to do an audit next year on other areas.
So Councillor Crimson.
I would just caution, I understand it makes sense to focus on the stuff that we already know, but there is a purpose of testing the other stuff. So, if the committee was comfortable to endorse moving forward this year, it certainly wouldn't be a mode of travel I'd confirm year after year on that basis. So, does that make sense, Ashley?
Yes, and we agree with you, and I can see Jacinta was about to make a comment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in relation to, for example, the tax side of things, fringe benefit, we are rolling that on a regular program regardless of whether we've identified something, but completely hear what you're saying. It's just with the cyber, the BCP, specifically, those are ones we really want to do better with. So,
I mean, I guess asking members to we'll cut to the chase. Is there comfort that for this next 12 months period that we're changing that focus, acknowledging that next year there would be a return to sort of business as usual with a more traditional internal audit program that's obviously going to be agreed and discussed at this committee as well. Is there any views or comments around that? Member Sarah. Member Jenny, sorry.
Yeah, I agree in principle, 1 year. And I think the areas identified are really high risk, so it's probably good money spent. Just a broad comment around the financial policy reviews. There's some pieces there that I wonder whether they really are a priority. So I suppose it's just, I don't want to go into the detail, but just make sure that financial policy review is targeted on the higher risk policies. And I'm thinking specifically in my mind about financial delegation policy. That's not in that list. And I think, purchasing policy for staff maybe isn't a priority. But don't want to dive into the detail on that, but just to think carefully and use the funding and resourcing carefully.
Yeah, thank you, Member Jenny. We'll just actually check on that. The financial delegations policy, we reviewed that in June, July last year, wasn't it? To correspond with the incoming CEO. But is there intention to relook at that as part of this, or
Not specifically, and probably in fairness, this has listed some options, but we have absolutely reviewed that recently. But it's a very good point in terms of what's the biggest priority areas.
would you like to, based on what is listed there, would you like to indicate or signal your advice around what should be the higher priority items in terms of what's listed there?
Probably not. I think we can leave it to the officers' discretion. I am interested in seeing the financial delegation policy. If I can be sent a copy, please. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, unless there's any further comments, questions about this, I think I'll just move straight to 2.3 and move that the Risk and Assurance Committee endorse utilising the $51,000 budgeted for internal audit to assist with fixing known areas for improvements such as fringe benefit tax, business continuity program, cybersecurity and financial policies during the 2023-2024 financial year. Could I have a seconder for that? Mayor Burney? Any debate or discussion? Hopefully not. All in favour? Thank you. Excellent. Thank you, Ashley and Rob. Oh, we've got another one for you. Excellent. 6.8, conflict of interest report. We'll just start with 2.1, 2.2, that the report be received and that this matter or decision be recognised as not significant. The seconder for that, Councillor Young. All in favour of? Thank you. Ashley.
Thank you. This is the first time that we have reported to this committee or Finance Audit and Risk Committee as the previous on conflict of interest. And the purpose of this report is to update the committee on Council's current and planned approach on recording and managing conflicts of interest with our employees, so HDC staff. This doesn't contain or relate to elected member conflicts within this report. There are current number of conflicts that exist within staff. These are low level. They range from owning a property in this district to being a shareholder, a part shareholder in a company that we then procure with. There are management plans in place to ensure that when the conflict exists, whether it be a potential conflict or actually a current conflict, that there is a process in place to ensure that that person isn't involved in whatever decision making or funds that are associated with that risk. And then there's also the conflicts where there's relationship with staff, so it might be that a family member might be on staff or that a close friend or family member work for an organisation that we procure with or have dealings with. There is a register here. There is definitely room for improvement and for consistency across the business. A piece of work that's currently underway is to ensure that all staff complete a conflict of interest form, whether or not they have a conflict to declare. That currently isn't the practice here, and that will be rolling out to be completed by June. So there is some improvement in this space, and that will be a focus within the next month to ensure that that goes through, and that when going forward, we'll look to report back on a 6-monthly basis. However, if there is a significant conflict that arises and needs to be notified to this table, then we will notify appropriately.
Thank you, Ashley. And so just to reiterate that this doesn't relate to elected member conflict of interest. The intention is that there'll be some further work done around that, and that there'll be something coming through to a future risk and assurance committee meeting around that. And so essentially the purpose of this report is just to note what's being done, provide that level of assurance that there are some actions underway. And so I guess if I could ask elected members of the committee to focus on, is there anything further you're expecting or you would like to see or that you'd like to to dive into in terms of what's been put in front of us. Member Sarah.
I just have one question through the chair. Will this be an annual attestation?
Yes.
Any further comments, questions? Looks like we're all very comfortable with the report and what's being proposed. So what I will do is I will move 2.3 that the committee note the work that the council is currently undertaking to better understand and manage conflicts of interest. Do I have a second for that? Councillor Grimstone. Any discussion or debate? No. Put the motion. All in favour? Right, thank you very much, team. Alright, on to item 6.9, which is the Legislative Compliance Report. We've got Ashley at the table. Start by moving 2.1, 2.2, that the report be received and that this matter or decision be recognised as not significant. I have a seconder for that. Councillor Young. All in favour? Thank you. So, just some couple of comments here. Noting that this report is again the first time we've had anything like this come to council or council committee, and so we're, I guess, at the beginning of a journey. And I think one of the things that I've reflected on is that at the moment we don't know what we don't know, and so initially the focus of this paper is or this piece of work is this report is on some of those key pieces of legislation, acknowledging that we have touch points with potentially hundreds of acts and regulations and other legislative instruments. So, and that this ultimately will be better informed once we do that stock take of Section 17A's bylaws, policies, and so really this is just a sort of a starting update on where we're at in the process that will be followed internally and operationalised. Did you want to talk any more than that, or have I summarised everything you wanted to say?
You pretty much summed it up very well, and I guess the point to reiterate here is this is the first time we've brought this to council, and I think it's a really important piece that should be coming through. As Sam said, we don't know what we don't know, and the process next for us is to do some data and analysis and a bit of stock take around 17A bylaws legislation to ensure that we are meeting the compliance that we need to, but that is a process to do that, and we haven't yet started that, but that'll be on the plan to start that pretty much as soon as possible, and then bring back on a quarterly basis. So bring back, the first one will be obviously the outcome of that, but then bring back on a quarterly basis whether or not we are meeting that compliance.
Actually, just to mention, I guess there are other things that council is exposed to, which provides some assurance around legislative compliance, and a recent example is the IANZ audit, and so obviously where that type of thing is occurring and is providing that assurance, that can either be potentially reflected in this report or just as we did previously with the IANZ report circulated by email to the committee.
Agree.
Did members of the committee have... Member Sarah, thank you.
Sorry. When we introduced this at an organisation I worked for, the feedback from managers was, well, what training are you giving me to make sure that I know exactly what sort of legislation I'm supposed to be complying with? Is that something that you are considering or awaiting feedback?
So in part of the writing this report and thinking about how we're going to implement this into council is a very valid point, is we need to ensure that we've upskilled the staff to be able to be aware of what they're looking for and ensure that the training's there. So that is something that we're going to have to roll out and ensure that staff understand what it is and the process, and then what to do if something does arise. Yeah, we'll definitely need to do that. And much like, not jumping back to the previous report, but that is something that we're going to roll out with conflict of interest as well, is to ensure that when we go back to staff and say everyone needs to do it, that there's really clear guidance around what is a conflict and what isn't, and that will need to be the same when we roll this out to staff as well. because we have asked staff, we've done the initial, what do you think? And I have had, questions come back like, oh, what does this mean? Or am I looking at this? Or so it definitely showed that there is a space there that we need to upskill and train staff.
Yeah, if I could just add, that sounds really good. And I think this all comes under, as you mentioned, with the previous conflicts of interest report as well, it all comes under that sort of headline of good conduct in an organisation as well. Thank you.
Any further comment, questions? Councillor Tukuba.
Yeah, it's probably more of a comment. So, improving the monitoring of legislative compliance, so there's the must-dos, and within the performance measures of an LTP, under each activity we have those must-dos, and then we also have another category which I believe we'll review as well around levels of service expectations and how we articulate what we're achieving or not achieving. But then I kind of cast my eye to like bylaws and our ability, it is ability to enforce or follow through, because we have, because it's either you're stretched or, you know where I'm going with that, and it's also consistency. Like, you apply those, if you're going to apply that rule on that part there, then you will be criticised if we're not doing it. So there's a bit of a balancing act in how much resource we can support to follow through. And I don't know if within your exploration or investigation of how best to do this, some of that will come through, or whether you'll provide that information back to council so we can understand what is the best approach and how much is too much, and getting the balance right.
And so I guess two aspects to that question. So in terms of the bylaws, we won't necessarily be looking at the enforcement of the bylaw and ensuring that that's consistent, but more so when the bylaw comes up for review, are we actually reviewing it on time? Are we doing a corrective review on that? Are we meeting the legislative compliance on what that needs to look like? Are we consulting on that versus the enforcement of the bylaw? So it's looking at that documentation, ensuring that we're meeting the requirements that we have to within the timeframes and the Act versus the enforcement of the bylaw.
So just to pick up on that point, because obviously we'd recently signed off on a compliance policy which is quite limited in focus, so it doesn't extend to all bylaws, but there's also a touch point into that, because I think one of the things that Councillor Tukupu is saying is why would we have a policy or a bylaw if we don't even enforce it, or we don't have the tools that or an intention to follow through with actually enforcement tools or compliance tools. And so maybe there is a piece that we could build in here around we might be complying with this, but we're not actually enforcing it or applying it because
I think there's definitely I'll have to have a think about how it would necessarily come into this piece, but I think there's definitely value in what you're saying, and it might be that I know there previously was a compliance report that was brought through to council to, actually I think it was finance audit and risk from memory, where it talked about here's the building information, here's the resource, here's the compliance information, and it might be that that's reinstated or revised to ensure that we include that stuff. I'm just trying to think, but I think it's a really valid point if we have a bylaw, and I know through elections when I was the election officer, we have, what do we do with signs, or we don't have a bylaw, how can we enforce them? It's something that's come up in many different avenues here at council. I haven't yet drawn the linkage to this piece of work, but I think it's a valid comment and something that we could bring back through maybe a compliance report, or I'll have a chat to the team and get back to the table.
So actually I think I will just flag, I think that obviously one of the things that the organisation is going to be doing is that stock taking of bylaws, stock taking of policies, and it's probably through the stock take exercise where there'd be able to be some of that assessment, but ultimately the stock take will only inform into this report about whether we're actually complying with legislation that applies to us, as opposed to application of legislation we've made. Is that a fair?
Yes, but I think there'll be some really vital data that comes out of that, and I think there is a piece that potentially could be picked up and said, okay, here's, are we complying, are we not, and then what's the next step on that? Do we then want to report back on how valuable is that bylaw? Are we actually enforcing the bylaw? If we're not, do we need it? If we're not, do we need to do something about it? Do we need to put more resource? I think that is like the next step, and the data that we collate can be useful to that.
Councillor Tukapua.
Yeah, this time I've got a question. Are you aware of any bylaws currently that haven't met the time frames? I'm on the hearings committee and I feel like I haven't done much lately.
Not off the top of my head, but open to the group managers. Not off the top of my head, but I haven't delved deep into that work yet.
It's probably fair to say that responsibility passed to Caro and her team. So I'm thinking that once the long-term plan amendment's finished, that will be one of the items that will come onto the work program pretty soon.
I think it's a very valid thing to say, is what we don't know is we don't know at the moment, and we need to do that analysis piece.
Yes, of course. So sorry, I've just realised the connection of the bylaws, because there is requirements around the review periods and the deadlines, the validity of those existing bylaws. So absolutely see the relevance in terms of this report. So do think that we obviously, once we've done that stock take, that absolutely needs to flow through.
And similar to Section 17A reviews with a contract, if a contract's coming up to end, we need to ensure that we've done a Section 17A review. So I know that Nikki and the procurement team are looking at identifying what contracts are coming up for renewal and which one of those need to have a review in place. So that part of that work has already started in that space, but it's just ensuring that we're consistent and we are doing those and we're doing them within the time frame.
Member Sarah.
Just one question, or just one comment really, in terms of what Councillor Tukapua was asking about before in relation to the consistency of the application. I would like to think that some of that information might come through and be part of an analysis of the complaints that are received as well. If you got one that wasn't consistent with the application of another, that's where you'd find this, whereas I do see this one as being slightly different. It is just about, are we aware of what we should be doing and which ones we should be complying with.
All right, team. Any further comments, questions on the legislative compliance report? All right, I'll move 2.3, that the committee note the council's planned approach for improving the monitoring of legislative compliance. Can I have a seconder for that? Councillor Grimstone. Assume no discussion or debate. Put the motion. All in favour? Thank you. All right, moving on to 6.10. Almost there. Risk and Assurance Committee Work Programme. If I could move 2.1, 2.2, that the report be received and that this matter or decision be recognised as not significant. There was a seconder for that. Councillor Grimstone again, thank you. All in favour? Thank you. Ashley, did you want to kick us off?
Sure thing. This is just the standard work program that comes through. Please cast your eyes over this and identify if there was something that you're expecting to come up and it's not on there, something you might want to push forward or delay. It's really over to you for any comments about what's on this work program or you might like to see on the work program. Anything further to add, Jacinta?
No, I don't think so. One quick one is the PwC one. I'm not certain we've actually got that confirmed yet with them in terms of their visit. So just wanted to flag that.
Councillor Tukapua.
Yeah, we get to do a deep dive one each quarter, right? And there's a blank one, so potentially we could propose one. Otherwise, I mean, I have a few in mind. Otherwise, I wondered, because it's retrospective now, that trolley bus system deep dive for August. There's obviously learnings that will go with that, but there are, to my knowledge, no other trolley bus systems across the district and therefore highly unlikely to occur again. So do we necessarily need to spend energy on that? Well, because it's cool if it is, but I do have some other.
I'm just going to comment on that because I think that there is an opportunity to do a lessons learned reflection piece, but I too agree that there might be some higher priority things to deep dive into. And so one of the things that I was going to suggest, and I see Daniel's not here unfortunately, but was the Foxton water tank that elected members viewed on the site visit and the process around that, and whether this committee could be a focal point to look at the current situation with that, acknowledging that there's still a further report to come to council about options. Did you have any comment on that now, or did you?
Agree. So agree with what you were saying, Councillor Tukupo. These are suggestions, and I think it's really a valid point to kind of chuck them out the window and put something else in if it's more important, and not spend our time on that. In terms of the water tanks, specifically from a health and safety point of view, or from just noting that when we do deep dives we kind of look at it from an aspect of health and safety, or from a different point of view?
Yes, so sorry, I had overlooked that the proposal was to look at the trolley bus lines from a health and safety perspective rather than a broader risk and assurance deep dive perspective. But so with that in mind, Councillor Tukupo and other members, do we have a view around what we want to see from a deep dive health and safety perspective, and then maybe we can talk about if there's a broader deep dive in terms of just this committee function.
Okay. Well, because while I do support the water tank example, and then I had a couple others, but I don't have the health and safety one.
Member Jenny, you look like you're about to.
Sorry, there's a piece that for the broader program that I think's missing, and it's about the Three Waters reform, and it may be going to another committee, but it's such a big, tricky monster risk at the moment. There's obviously a lot of transition planning and so on, but it's moving really quickly, and there's a huge impact, for this organisation. So I'm just wondering if there should be some kind of regular reporting on this over the next year as government decisions progress, and we're kept informed. But if it's happening in another committee, then that's fine.
So we have a Three Waters transition task force. We actually just met today. But if the could I just ask you to just perhaps articulate a little bit more of what, if we were to ask for a report to be brought to this committee, what are some of the kind of things you'd like to be within that?
Yeah, I think it's more just the risk lens across it. So all the risks off the back of that whole reform program. What's the council's program to manage those risks? How you're working with other entities in the broader risk management. It's just so the focus is really around the risk perspective and preparing for transition and the changes ahead, because I expect it's going to be really challenging.
Thank you for that. Mayor Bernie.
This might seem rather mundane, but I would love to see some sort of health and safety deep dive into the state of our footpaths. If there's anything that I get more complaints about, and views, people, I think we need to understand from a health and safety point of view if they're really good or not.
Look, I'd support that, and in fact, if I see nodding heads around the table, I think that that is an area of focus, particularly given a recent incident that we've members of the committee would have seen by email. So, unless there's an allergic reaction from anyone, I think that probably is a good focus for the next health and safety deep dive.
Yep, supportive of that.
Excellent. Also, then, just to close the loop on the Three Waters risk reporting mentioned by Member Jenny, I think I would support something along that line. did the officers have a view on that and what that could look like?
I think in terms of the risk, when we talk about key significant risks, the Three Waters one is one that we could come and report on in terms of deep diving into that one from that specific lens, and that should satisfy, because you're absolutely right, there are massive ones, and we are talking about all elements of them through that committee, but not just focusing strictly on the risk side of it.
So on that basis, could we request that we incorporate a little bit more of a focus on Three Waters transition related risks? Sorry to add to your workload, Rob, but and others, but I think that would be a useful thing to bring back to the next committee meeting. And then in terms of this sort of broader deep dive that potentially has some other touch points in terms of risk, procurement, other operational risks in terms of the Foxton water tank, do members consider that a priority for August? Do you want to shift that potentially into November or not do it at all? I mean, is there a view around that? Councillor Grimstone.
Sorry, I'll go about. I'll go about 2 minutes back, just about the footpaths. So if we do table it as a discussion document, then can we just make sure we reach out to Grey Power to let them know that it's on the agenda for discussion?
So sorry, and so support that. And so just on that idea of the broader focus deep dive, where are people sitting or thinking around that? Mayor Bernie?
I just wonder whether that's a topic for a projects committee type of, I think we need to understand the whys and wherefores, and I don't think we've had a decent report in terms of why it is the situation has arisen like it has, and I wonder whether it's more of an infrastructure delivery issue rather than this. It might develop into something like that later on, but I think initially it could be an infrastructure projects type of thing.
Look, I support that, and that could be a focus through a capital project steering committee with a clear action point around that discussion around, do we want to look back and unpick some of the, and perhaps reflect on some learnings, and how do we do that, whether it's this committee that becomes the focal point of that or that stays with the steering committee. Can we put that as an action on officers to, I'm not sure who the chair, I can't recall who the chair of that committee, the Councillor Brannigan. I'll also raise that with him, but if officers could also take a note of that. Everyone
Jody.
comfortable with that approach?
Jody has captured it.
Fantastic, thanks, Jody. Alright, is there any further comments, questions on the work program, or are we comfortable with where that sits? I don't think we need to make that final resolution. Councillor Tupua.
I heard correctly around the park and the water tank reservoir for a different committee at a different time.
Yes.
Okay. So another suggestion might be information management around the accuracy of our record holdings, i.e., incident at the cemetery that landed us in the news, risk of reputation. So obviously, just assurances around our records, and obviously there's been really good learnings, and we've had the outcome, and it's good for families, but understanding that we don't want that to happen again. So reassurance around the records that exist now for everything else in that space, not just that cemetery but all.
Thank you, Councillor Tupua, and you'll note that it's on the risk register, and I can't recall the score, but I think it's, Rob might be able to help me, but I think it's got a moderate risk rating, and so that is a focus, as I understand it, for the organisation. But I agree that, and so maybe what we can do we go into committee shortly, we can unpack that a little bit more. But then in terms of a future agenda, perhaps we could have a slightly again more detailed report back on what has been done and what is underway in relation to that specific risk, because I guess it's been quite a high profile particular case, and it might be useful to have some public reporting come back through the next agenda, if that's possible.
Brent has something to add.
Mr. Harvey.
I can just quickly talk a little bit on that one. So it is on the risk register, as you touched on, Mr. Chairman. There is a piece of work that's about to start on that with the full audit, and we've already reached out to our some stakeholders in terms of kicking that off. So it's likely to start progressing at pace throughout the next month.
Did you want to follow up?
Yes, satisfied with that, but if that last deep dive of the last quarter, which is next year, if that is ready, it would be a good time to go over it, or not, if there was something else that took precedence.
I think the deep dive can be very. We can pick one big thing to do a deep dive on, or there could be, I guess, a series of a couple of smaller things. So I'm certainly not. I think that's been noted by the team, and we can have a discussion around what that looks like in terms of the August meeting. All right, I think that brings us to the conclusion of the open committee meeting. So thank you everyone for your contributions. What have I done wrong? Oh, I think we can flag 2 by 3. So, yeah, that's all right. So what I'll do is move that we go into public excluded on the basis of section 48(1)(a), withholding ground section 7(2)(a). Can I have a seconder for that, please? Mayor Bernie, thank you. All in favour? Thank you. Thanks. We can turn off the live streaming.